promoted it on my channel as well.
Okay, awesome. I'll probably once people.
It's a little early for my audience.
Honestly, same for me too. What's like your audience breakdown? Is it?
It's mostly American, but I do get folks from all over the world. I started a member community in October.
Okay.
And I have about 2/3 of the folks are based in the Americas somewhere.
Makes sense.
And the remaining third in Europe and Asia, East Asia.
All right, are we live, guys? Let us know. How's it looking? How's the audio and all that? What's good? Where are you guys all tuning in from? I'm super excited for this. This is like the first time I'm doing like an in-person stream.
Oh, really?
Yeah, first time.
It's
first time. It's fun. You've done this before? Just like
oh, sure. Yeah.
I just feel like
the vibe is so much better in person.
It is. And I think the fact that we can get live feedback like this is just going to be like, I mean, it's already the future of podcasting. I just feel like every podcast should do it live at this point.
If you can do it live and in person, yes.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Have you started a podcast or thinking about that? I mean, I guess your format is kind of like
I guess what I do technically is a vlog, though I hate that word.
Yeah.
It's a very ugly word in my mouth.
Sure.
I actually had invited guests on my channel for a while, and I noticed that it was being punished by the algorithm.
Mm-hmm.
So I decided to cancel that for the time being, though I might start a new channel where I host long-form discussions, and I think that would be better for just kind of silo those two formats.
And I think the reason why I'm super excited to talk to you is I feel like a lot of people, right, they're always so hung up on the word expert. Like, where did he go to school? Like, I don't think anyone can say that about you. You're a doctor. You have your PhD.
You can. I mean, you can talk about my school and where I got my diploma, or say that
people are always going to have some sort of excuse.
Sure, yeah.
But I think like a lot of people that talk about dating, right? And this isn't calling anyone out, whether that be Fresh and Fit or the whatever podcast. I feel like a lot of it isn't sometimes maybe not in like the best faith. I think for you at least bring some sort of like expert perspective that makes it really interesting.
Well, I appreciate that. For the record, though, I rarely call myself an expert because I try to avoid arguments of authority. I don't enjoy them myself when they're leveled at me. I think that if the argument is sound and rational and makes sense and fits with people's experience, they should be willing to consider it regardless of whether somebody has a degree or not.
Right. That's fair. That's a good point. Yeah. Because how important is school going to be these days in the future?
I learned very much in my classes that was useful to helping people.
Right. Well, awesome. Let me start promoting this on Instagram. So, where are you guys Where are you guys tuning in from? Texas, Washington. Let's see.
Is the distance from the mic okay?
Yeah. How are we sounding, by the way, audio wise? Just want to make sure we get all the technical stuff out the way. Vegas, Ontario, Belarus, Mexico. So yeah, one thing that's cool is that my audience is 50% US, 50% international.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. I mean, I guess we do kind of like topics that is applicable around the world. Of course, it's like America-centric, but...
It seemed like your most popular videos were about Brazil.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of controversy around that, but...
Yeah. I spent a good deal of time in Brazil in the past. It's
you did?
country, yeah.
My girlfriend's from Brazil, actually.
Fala português?
Pouquito.
Pouquito.
Oh, shit. See, yeah. Wow, you speak it. Well, so sorry, guys. Is the audio coming in okay? Just want to make sure. What we can do is I can boost it up a little bit. What the hell is going on? Okay. Yeah, sometimes you get the spammers in the chat too. Let's see. Put up the gain. Okay, how's this? Is this coming in a little bit better?
Testing 1 2.
Yeah, it can be louder. Audio seems fine to me. You're always gonna get a bunch of different opinions when it comes to stuff like this. Let's see. Too loud? Gen is loud now? Are we too loud? The audio is perfectly fine. Okay, we're good. Okay. Well, Let's just make sure. How is it focused on doctor as well? Just make sure. Cool. Okay, there it is. Perfect. Yeah, let's start it. Well, doctor, nice to officially meet you.
You can call me Orion.
Orion. Okay, Orion's a lot better. Who are you? And why should people listen to you for relationships and dating?
Well, who am I? That's a complicated question, isn't it? Nature of identity. But in terms of my professional experience, I have a PsyD, a doctorate of psychology. I've been in private practice since I graduated in 2015. So I have 9 years of private practice experience. During that time, I focused on men's mental health. So all of my patients were men. And I started PsychHacks, which is a YouTube channel, about 3.5 years ago. My motivation behind that was that I was working with a number of guys in my private practice, and I could see that they were getting better. They were improving their lives. And I thought, oh, that's cool. That made me feel good. And it was nice to see. But I figured that those 30 guys I was working with every year weren't necessarily special or unique. And if what we were doing together helped them, it might help potentially 30 million men. So I decided to take some of the insights and interventions I was using to address the problems that were coming up in my clinical practice. And I wanted to launch them in front of a wider audience to see if it might help folks on a grander scale.
I think one thing that's interesting about you is I think there's a lot of people who talk about dating these days, especially in the modern context, right? And a lot of people, I feel like unfairly have also been kind of blamed as misogynistic or blamed as red pill or kind of just like cast away as like, look, these guys aren't experts. Why should we talk to them? One thing that's interesting about you is that you come from a psychological perspective, right? You went to school, you have actual private practice experience. Would you say your ideas are controversial, or do people just not like hearing the truth?
Well, those two things might be the same thing. I think that controversy is often used as marketing these days. But one of the what I call Batman rules about my channel is that I try to speak the truth in a way that neither enrages men nor alienates women, because I don't think that the world needs either of those type of people. And men and women seem to be having difficulty coming together these days, and I don't want to be part of the problem. I want to be part of the solution. That doesn't mean that we can't it's wrong to just get on a camera and say everyone hold hands and sing Kumbaya, because there are misunderstandings and issues that need to be resolved both intrapsychically within men and within women, and interpersonally between the two genders, right? So that's kind of where I come from. Like, I don't stir up controversy. Like I'd have 10 times as many followers if I used clickbaity titles or I used really provocative, extreme language. And to be honest, I think I made an episode about this some years ago. There is a pull for content creators to do that. I don't know if you've experienced that yourself, but like, for example, I started PsychHacks and it took about 1.5 years for the first episode to get any kind of attention whatsoever.
Sure. YouTube's a hard game, man.
It's tough. You know, it was the 97th episode I created, and it went viral several months after it was published for some reason. But it's very difficult to keep. I posted an episode every other day for about 1.5 years, and it was getting 3 views, 5 likes. It was, you know, it's tough because you're putting a lot of effort and energy into it.
And it hits your ego, right? Like, I have to
It didn't really hurt my ego so much as it just made me feel, you know, after about 1 year, I was contending with some measure of hopelessness in the sense of, I had a dream for this channel and I was uncertain as to whether I would be able to fulfill it. But that's why I gave myself 3 years before I would allow myself to give up. Anyway, during that time, I definitely felt a pull to do more extreme things in order to garner some kind of attention. And there was this little voice in my head that was basically like, no one cares anyway. Like, you could say whatever the fuck you wanted. And it's like the 3 people who are watching you aren't going to cause anything. So it's like, on some level, the internet requires, or pulls people to enact more extreme versions of their personality in order to attract attention. That's the attraction.
And especially in dating, I feel like. I think especially because there's so much you can say about it, that confirms people, or I don't know.
There's a lot of bad advice. So
right?
there's a few perennial subjects that I think are never going to go away. There's sex and dating and relationships.
Sure.
I'm in that, obviously. There's money and finances. There's politics and current events. There's health and fitness. And there's definitely in every one of those domains, ideologues, people who tend towards extreme perspectives and misinformation and untruth. So I don't think it's unique to love and dating. It's just one of the things that people are perennially interested in.
That's well said. That's well said. So I'm curious on what your audience is like, right? I already started reading your book, by the way, guys. Check it out, The Value of Others. And one thing you said, like in the introduction, was you're not just speaking to men, right? You're a man yourself. You're actually trying to speak to both men and women because it takes two to tango.
Sure.
Right? But I'm curious on what your audience actually does look like, right? Like we always strive to reach as many people as possible. But like you said, there's a pull from the audience. You start creating a core audience. What does your YouTube audience breakdown look like? Is it mostly men? Is it mostly women?
Sure.
Curious.
So yeah, I mentioned that in the book. The book was not written exclusively for men, and I didn't make PsychHacks specifically to speak to men either.
Sure.
My private practice was about that, but this was for a much larger audience. So my first episode that went viral seemed to go viral with women. So for a while, the primary breakdown of my channel was majority women, maybe 70% female. And in fact, my very first invitation was on a female-led podcast. So I've been on a few of those. Over time, the demographics have shifted. I think right now it's about 80 to 85% male, 15 to 20% female.
Yeah.
But it gets, YouTube alone gets...
it's like 70% male or something like that.
I think that's true. But I would say my channel last month got over 6 million views. So that's at least 1 million female viewers who are watching, which is a fairly sizable audience.
Interesting. So I think one thing that I'm curious about is, you talk a lot about dating and relationships. If you don't mind me asking, why aren't you married?
People love to ask about my personal life. So, which is really interesting. I'll answer that question.
Sure.
But that's what I've seen, one of the criticisms that's leveled against me. It's like, why would you listen to relationship advice from a guy who is unmarried? And I am unmarried. And to my mind, like I was saying just a few minutes ago, saying you should listen to me because I'm married is another version of an argument of authority. It's like saying, listen to me because I'm a doctor.
Sure.
Frankly, it costs $80 in an hour of time to get married. It doesn't require much at all to actually get the marriage license. So saying that you should listen to me because I'm married is kind of like saying you should take my medical advice because I'm CPR certified. Like CPR might actually take more time to complete than getting a marriage license at City Hall, right? So to my mind, that's not a very persuasive rationale for why you should just uncritically accept another person's advice. Like I said, you should listen, consider that there might be some truth in it, apply it in your own life experimentally, and if it works, keep it. If it doesn't, you can throw it out. I don't mind. So I think it's more germane to ask whether I have the kinds of relationships in my life that I would prefer to have. And I would say that I do. And I think that's the better question to ask. Like, it's no success to be married if you don't want to be.
Right.
It's no success to not be married if you want to be, right? So it's like, are you able, whether you're a man or a woman, to have the kinds of relationships that you would prefer to have with the opposite sex, assuming you're heterosexual? If so, maybe you have something worth saying that could be of value to other people. So to answer your question about why I'm unmarried is, I've said it before, I don't quite see what I would get out of that situation as a man. I don't know how that would make my life better. It seems like it would be a lot of risk without any real upside, which on some level is unfair. If we're going to ask someone to assume greater risk, then there should be some possible greater payout. Like you go to Vegas, if the riskier bets tend to pay out more. And that's sort of symmetrical and just on some level. But to my mind, if I've read the license, I've read the contract that's kind of drawn up by the state, and I've talked to hundreds of divorced men, and I don't think it offers any real protection to either men or women in terms of like, it can be dissolved at will at any time by either party for any reason whatsoever. I mean, that anybody who thinks that an agreement that can be broken under those terms offers any kind of security or safety whatsoever is insane. Like, it's a false sense of security. Also, it generally, unless there's a very strong prenup, and prenups don't always get upheld in court, in many cases, one party is incentivized, often unconsciously, to terminate the relationship because they can get cash and prizes as a result. So it's like, I don't think that it's, from a behavioral perspective, wise to incentivize the dissolution of a relationship. We should incentivize the maintenance of the relationship if we want to keep it. So to my mind, my relationships tend to be safer and better when her happiness is tied to my happiness, and not that necessarily our best interests are opposed to one another.
So I definitely want to tap into that. But before I do, one question I do want to ask is, do you want kids, or is that also not really important to you?
You know, I go back and forth. There have been times in my life when I've really wanted kids, and there have been times when I really didn't. For me, it would be very important for my life to feel very stable and prosperous for a sustained period of time. And there have been times when I've approached that, and then something unexpected happened, and it kind of threw my life for a little bit of a tumble, and I had to repivot and build again. As an entrepreneur, I've had to do that a few different times in my life. And that seemed like not a very wise or responsible moment to start a family. So I also know, because I've seen it up close, that children require a great deal of time and energy and money, and those resources have to come out of somewhere. So, you know, if I was involved in raising children, I might not be here today talking to you. I might not have written a book, or it would have taken me 5 times as long to write that book, per se. So there are costs associated with raising kids, and I think that if I approach that, I want things to be stable and prosperous, and I have an abundance of resources to devote to the children without necessarily sacrificing some of the other personal and professional goals that I have.
So you mentioned something earlier when I asked about, do you want to be married? You said that your relationships work when her happiness is tied to your happiness.
Yeah.
Can you explain that a little bit?
Well, I think if we examine history, that the greatest corruptions and abuses occur when people cannot be removed from their position, or removing their position comes with sort of like a golden parachute. You can see that in some CEOs. Some people can get really fantastic severance packages. They're put in that position, and then they don't give a fuck anymore, and they run the company to the ground because they don't give a shit. You know, they get fired, they're going to walk away with $200 million or something like that. So what I think is best is to have very few, on some level, very few safety precautions is what keeps a relationship from going off the rails. This seems paradoxical. Did you see the Batman prequels, the Christopher Nolans?
Yeah.
Like, there's this great scene in The Dark Knight Rises where Bruce Wayne is trapped in the pit that no one can get out of because everyone's attached to the tether, and Wayne can only make that jump when he takes his safety net off. And it's like that awareness of additional danger and risk is what actually motivates him to make the jump. And everyone unconsciously wasn't putting as much effort into it because they knew they would be okay if they didn't make it on some level, right?
Right.
So let me give you an example. I've been in private practice for 9 years. I don't have any kind of minimum number of appointments. I don't have any contracts associated with how many sessions people can have. If you look at my calendar, it's completely empty like 3 weeks from now. And that's been that way since I started this practice. It was that way when I started previous businesses. The point is that I have to show up and do the best job that I can every single session. Like, I don't get to phone it in. even if I've worked with somebody for years. It's like if I put in too many poor sessions, too many in a row, I'm going to lose that client. And I think that's fair. Like the fact that I'm not guaranteed that client's business is what motivates me to show up as best as possible every single day.
Like we need stakes to be able to perform. Right?
Yes. I don't think anyone should assume that just because we have a shared history or we've done some good in the past, that we can be reasonably assured of continued relationship, whether it's personal or professional, indefinitely into the future. I think we have to kind of re-earn our commitment every day. And I think that's what motivates both men and women to show up in the best, most attractive light possible.
Interesting. So I think one thing I'm curious about is how did you come up with like your philosophy? Was it based on your own personal life experiences, obviously, but was there like a particular figure that potentially inspired you? I know in your interview with Soft White Underbelly, you mentioned Patrice O'Neill a couple of times.
Patrice is great.
Yeah. I'm curious where your influences are from.
Well, a lot of that book, more academically, is from Ludwig von Mises, who was an Austrian economist who I think was absolutely brilliant. His book, Human Action, was just a banger, man. It's like 900 pages long, but every single paragraph was just filled with clarity and insight. I loved his perspective. And he moved economics well beyond the simplistic supply and demand, because that's clearly not enough to explain why certain things have the values that they do. So a lot of what I've come up against, it's like it's not taught in schools and it's very rarely written in books. I came up against, I developed this philosophy experimentally and over time. To be honest, it came out of a heartbreak. So I was really crushed by a relationship that didn't work out. I ended it, but it needed to be ended. And there I was, and this wasn't the first time I was heartbroken, and I had to confront the possibility that if I knew what women wanted, if I knew what made relationships work, I wouldn't be heartbroken yet again. So maybe my fundamental premises, my fundamental assumptions about who women are, what they want, how relationships are supposed to work, maybe they were wrong. Like it took that many experiences of pain for that long to really come to my first principles and doubt them, which is a very serious kind of crisis of faith, to go to what you assume to be so true that you can barely even put it into words because you think it's like the fish can't see the water, as it were. So I basically said, okay, fuck it. I'm going to pretend that I don't know anything, that I'm just this alien that's landed on this planet, and what's a woman? What's going on? How do you do this? I don't know. And instead of having these ideas about what should work and trying to apply them on reality, I decided instead to let outcomes guide me and to use that to build a model based on what should work, right? Rather than the other way around. And on some level, that's kind of what we would ideally expect of scientists. A scientist doesn't come with preconceived notions about how nature or reality operates.
You test it.
Yeah,
hypothesize.
the scientist is like, teach me what I should believe by observation, right? And so I decided not to have contempt prior to investigation, which is often what keeps people siloed into their maladaptive beliefs, is that that's wrong, or that's negative judgment word, or that would never work. And so they don't even take the time to consider if there might be some truth in that perspective. Any case, I started to research stuff on the internet, watch videos on YouTube, read books that I might not have read before, and decided to approach dating like a behavioral scientist. And during that time, I must have gone, I think in 1 year, I probably went out on at least 300 first dates.
300 first
Oh, yeah,
dates?
yeah.
That's like pretty much once a day.
Yeah, it was pretty much, I was going on like maybe 5-6 dates a week, yeah.
Were you like going on dating apps to find them, or?
At that time, yeah, I was. And my threshold for who I would go out on a first date with was pretty low, because I guess it was a little disingenuous. I wasn't really dating at that time for a relationship. if it happened, great. I wouldn't be opposed to it, but I was dating more to to kind of figure out what worked and also to refine my dating practices. I wanted to get good at dating.
Okay.
And a person might have to put in hundreds of reps to get good at something. Like there's very few, I think people just sort of assume that they should be good at relationships or they should be good at dating or seduction. And I don't know where that comes from, but very few things can be mastered in just a few attempts or just a few iterations. So if you're really serious about this, I would encourage folks to practice more. Okay. So I went out with a lot of different women and I started to listen to them. I started to apply different things. Some of these things I'm like, oh, this would never work. I'm like, no, that's potentially the old Orion. Let's try some new things out. And I'd be surprised. It's like, holy shit, she responded well to that. That's not what I expected at all. So over time, and it took about 3 years of kind of experimentation to arrive at a pretty consistent model of what seems to work in terms of anything from getting a date to escalating an interaction towards a sexual encounter, if that's what you want, to maintaining interest in a long-term relationship. And I feel pretty confident. And once I kind of got that more or less set in my own life, I began teaching some of those principles to other guys who were coming to me. Hey, I'm having trouble meeting women. Hey, I'm having trouble with my wife or my girlfriend. I said, okay, well, based on what I've learned, this is what you might want to try. They try it out. More often than not, it helps them out. Another confirmation, great. So do that another 1,000 times and start making content about it, write a book, and now here I am.
So let's get into the core concepts and theories, right?
Sure.
One thing I read in your book so far is you describe relationships traditionally as men being captains and women the passengers.
Historically, yeah.
Can you explain this dynamic?
Sure. So the metaphor I use for the sexual marketplace is that the sexual marketplace is like this old-timey dock where all these ships are moored, right? And at every slippage, there's a ship and a captain standing in front of that ship. And that person is trying to attract passengers on board. And the passengers are walking up and down the dock trying to find, let's say, the most comfortable, affordable passage to where they want to go. So there's a kind of complementarity to captains and passengers, but there's also a fundamental antagonism. Like they need each other, but they're not really aligned with their goals on some level. Like just think about kind of commercial airlines. Think about the relationship between how they handle their business and how you buy a ticket. If they had their druthers, they'd just cram us in there like cattle.
Yeah. Cattle class.
Right? Like I've seen some pictures where you don't even get to like sit down and you're just sort of like kind of perched on a little half.
And pray to God you're not sitting to a fat person.
I mean, it's tough. Definitely if you can afford it, business class is the way to travel, but it's really expensive. So like they would just want to cram as many people into their cabins as possible for as much as they can get away with. And they just want you to like shut up, be docile, and be taken to where they want you to go on some level. Passengers, on the other hand, they want the most affordable ticket. They want comfort. They want to be kind of taken care of, lots of leg room. They want a variety of times and destinations to choose from. So the way that they approach making a decision is kind of antagonistic, but they both have to kind of make concessions to the other if they want to do business with each other. Like if a carrier really did cram people in like cattle, but its competitors didn't, that would be a poor business decision. By the same token, a passenger who was way too picky probably isn't going to go anywhere. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, historically, men have been captains. I use this awkward construction. They've had to be and they've gotten to be captains. And women had to be and have gotten to be passengers. And I put it that way because it's sort of wrong to assume that one is necessarily better than the other. Both roles come with privileges and responsibilities, benefits and liabilities. It's not that being a captain is all roses, and being a passenger is just this passive, um, uh, disadvantaged position. Some passengers wield more power on the ships than their captains, right? And I talk about that in the book as well. And this is just because, I mean, I think until even late in the 19th century in the West, women couldn't even own private property, so they couldn't, they weren't in the workforce. How are they going to build a boat and learn to sail? Like, for better or for worse, that wasn't an option that was held out to women. So men historically have had to be and gotten to be captains, and women have had to be and have gotten to be passengers. That's no longer true, though. So as I talk about in the book, captains and passengers are technically gender neutral terms. And we can and do have female passengers and female captains. And we theoretically can have male passengers as well, but that's much less common. Yeah.
I see. So how has modern dating changed this dynamic?
Well, it's changed it significantly in a number of ways. So modern dating, to my mind, is the beginning of dating app and app-based culture. So we can talk about how apps have changed it in a moment, but let's talk about how just introducing female captains has changed the dynamic, because that's done so significantly. So one of the main issues with relationships now that women can be captains is what I call the two-body problem. Are you familiar with that?
No.
Okay. The two-body problem is, I heard it initially in the context of graduate school. Did you go to grad school at all? Okay. So grad school is a dreary, not good times place. It's where happiness goes to die in many cases. Unless maybe if you go to business school, I hear you got to get to party and schmooze a little bit, but in most cases, no, it's not.
If you're getting
the
a
place to
PhD,
be.
it must be.
No, you should only do that as a last resort.
Yeah.
If there's no other way to do the thing that you want to do without it. Okay. So it's not a happy, good times place. And it can take, to get a PhD, an inordinate amount of time. Like in the States, 49% of folks who start a liberal arts PhD do not complete it within 10 years. That's insane. Like in 10 years, you could be a master of a craft. You could be a grandmaster of chess and you don't even know what the pony does, you know? It's like, and half of the people who start that track don't finish, right? So it's extraordinary commitment in terms of time and energy and opportunity cost. Like I talk about in the book, to become a captain, you need to build a ship, learn to sail, and plot a course. And each one of those things can take a great deal of time. I think it takes at least 10 years to become a captain minimum. Right. Okay. Now, the thing about being a captain is if you go through all of, whether it's a PhD or building a business or et cetera, if you actually go through the sacrifices and devote a decade of your life to ascending to that captaincy, like what's the chances that you're ever going to become a passenger on somebody else's boat?
You can't.
It would be impossible. Like that other captain's boat would have to be so much better and so much nicer and go to places that your ship could never sail. And still you would have to surrender on some level, some measure of pride in order to make that jump, right? So when folks invest that much time and effort into their captaincy, it's something that they're very reticent to surrender, as they should, right? It's why go through that just to jump ship, right? So that's kind of the situation that we're in now that we have female captains. It's like it could very well be that the male captain and the female captain have both spent a decade ascending to their captaincies and making a great deal of sacrifices in terms of time, energy, and money. And what's the good argument that it should be the woman who surrenders her captaincy and not the man? Like, just because that's historically been the case or because of his genitalia? I don't think that's a very persuasive argument.
Right.
And so you get to this situation where neither one really wants to surrender the captaincy. So how do you really sail together? You can't have two captains on one ship. Like that just creates confusion. A monster is anything with two heads, right? So there needs to be one person at the end of the day who makes the call. And sailing their own ships to the same destination is inefficient and a waste of resources. Like there's taking turns, it creates a lot of confusion and inefficiency. So like you have to be really committed to this this value of egalitarianism at a very high level to accommodate the ineffectiveness and the inefficiency that goes into trying to get two captains to sail together. It's just so much easier when one person is the captain and one person is the passenger than the other way around, right? It can also lead to competitiveness within the couple, which is generally not a good thing, especially if they're in the same field. So that's the origin of the two-body problem, is that let's say a man and a woman go to grad school, they complete their PhD, and they both want a teaching position. It's very difficult to get a teaching position in academia. Like there are at least 20 times more new PhDs minted every year than there are new academic tenure track positions. So most people don't get one. Most people don't get more than one. So the likelihood that both people in the couple are going to get an academic position at the same university is functionally zero.
Right now I'm making a video on birth rates, and one very interesting statistic that I found is that apparently 80% of women who didn't have kids was not by but was by circumstance. So they wanted to, but
involuntarily childless. Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. They waited too long, or they weren't able to find like the right partner, which is a pretty significant number if you think about it. Only 10% are childless by choice.
Yes. I've read that same statistic. I think I've talked about that on an episode. It just takes longer to do this than most people think. I mean, we don't like to talk about it, but I mean, really, I think you should date for a 1 year minimum before you decide to marry somebody or to reproduce with them. You know, obviously people do what they're going to do, and there might be exceptions from time to time, but 1 year seems like the minimum due diligence for a lifetime commitment. Most people take longer. And then, so let's say you're single. It takes maybe 6 to 12 months to find somebody that is a plausible candidate that you connect with. Then it takes another year or so to date. And if that doesn't work out, it's not like your heart is made of Teflon and you're just going to get right back on the dating scene the next day to be able to make yourself emotionally available to a new potential partner. So you generally have to spend some time grieving and getting over the previous relationship. So like it can take 5 years to get like one really good chance. Okay. And in general, let's just, for nice round numbers, say that women's reproductive window is between 20 and 40. Well, that's 20 years. 20 years divided by 5 is 4. So maybe women get 4 good chances at having a family. And imagine that they don't want to have their family in their 20s. In their 20s, they might want to get a master's degree or focus on their career or travel the world or date around and have lots of different fun experiences. Like, I don't want to blame women for wanting those things, the diversity of experience. It seems like so much of life in the world is at our fingertips these days through social media, and why not me, right? I want to feel all the feels and ride all the rides too, right? But that means that if you really only turn your attention to it in your 30s, maybe you only get 2 good chances. You know, that's not a lot. Men, for better or for worse, have a longer timeline to figure it out, which is good because we tend to mature more slowly, right? But we also don't have infinite chances. We might have twice as many if we're lucky. So this idea that we have all the time in the world, especially women who are interested potentially in having children, is incorrect.
So what you mentioned competitiveness throughout. And one thing that I'm curious about is you said that everyone is unique, but also replaceable.
Of course.
Can you elaborate on that?
Well, it's one of the paradoxes of human relationships, whether they're romantic or professional, is, the world is not going to fall apart if one person dies or loses their position. And thank God that's what allows civilization and businesses and individuals to persevere through time. Like, we don't want everything to fall apart. We don't want one person to be that important that in their absence, nothing can proceed, right? So like, we're going to get a new president pretty soon, right? Every company will have a new CEO eventually. Like nobody is so important that everything falls apart without them.
Yeah, like if I die today, like someone's gonna replace me.
No one's gonna be again.
Yeah.
That's the unique part. Like you're gonna bring whatever unique flavor you bring to this channel that has never been seen before and will never be seen again. Even with AI, AI will never be able to fully replicate you. It'll imitate you.
Let's hope not. Yeah.
It'll imitate you, and it will imitate you very well and convincingly, but it will never truly, in my opinion, generate new creative content. It will just be able to move stuff around in, which I guess is a form of creation, but it won't. I don't think it will be quite the same thing. So no one will ever do what Gen does again, but absolutely. We don't even have to wait for you to die. You know, there's already thousands of other people who are having conversations just like this today, right? And when you stop doing it, your loyal viewers aren't just going to say, well, I'll never watch YouTube again. They'll find somebody else to follow. And as should be, like no one should be that important, in my opinion. So that's sort of the paradox is, I mean, think about human life in general, that human life is incredibly precious and special. You know, the Buddhists talk about how the chances of being incarnated as a human being are like the chances of picking one particular grain of sand on a beach. Like it's like 1 trillion to 1, that we can't potentially underestimate how rare and precious life is in general in the universe, let alone human life. As far as I know, the only place that it exists, right? And we're here really for a very short amount of time. And yet, who thinks of the billions of people who came before us and are now laid to rest? You know, right. It's like life we've seen, unfortunately, through history is incredibly cheap. And on some level, that's the paradox, is we're in just like basic stuff. We're in the meat suit. There's nothing really special about that, but there is something special and unique about whoever is inside of that, whatever that happens to be. Hopefully that's not too abstract.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I'm kind of curious to hear your thoughts on this. I personally believe that a lot of things that we do is motivated by sex in some sort of way.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Do you agree with that notion, and why?
Yeah, I mean, I think Freud gets a lot of flack these days. He's a fairly unpopular thinker in the 21st century, but I don't think he got everything right, but he got a lot of things right. And one of the things I think he did get right was the primary driver of sex as a motivator in human behavior. Because sex is ultimately connected to reproduction, which is life itself. So sex isn't only about sex. Sex is about what gets you up in the morning and motivates you to like struggle and overcome to perpetuate your own life and life throughout time. And when people don't have that drive, then it's not like they're just not interested in sex, but they're these vigorous go-getters. Like those two things are often related to one another. Another thing to keep in mind is his concept of sublimation. Have you heard that term before?
No.
Okay, so he basically not only talked about how important the sex drive is to human beings, but he understood that these impulses were really socially unacceptable. And that on some level, civilization was predicated on human individuals' ability to repress these sexual instincts. If we just gave into them all the time, it would be a bacchanal orgy and there would be all kinds of transgressions and nothing would get done and it wouldn't be a good scene, right?
Sounds like San Francisco.
Oh, well, I guess only if you work in tech. So the idea here is bacchanal. So we have to suppress these impulses to be able to get along with other people. All right. If they're repressed too much, people can kind of get a little weird and neurotic. So ideally what happens is these impulses are channeled or sublimated into socially acceptable pursuits, one of which is like artistic creation.
Yeah.
I mean, you could have the nastiest, dirtiest sexual impulses, but if you put them in the lyrics of a song, you can say whatever you want.
Yeah.
On some level. You know what I'm saying? If it's a work of fiction, you could have the most depraved sexual fantasies played out on the page, and you could say it's just a work of the imagination, right?
Yeah.
So that's one way in which sexual impulse can be sublimated in a socially acceptable way.
I mean, they call it sex transmutation, essentially, right? They even talked about it in Think and Grow Rich. Like, the source of creativity is sexual energy.
Yeah, and I think in particular, we underestimate how much what men do in general is related to getting and keeping women.
So is it different for women, though?
Yeah, I think it is.
Why?
Why is it different for women? Well, because this is often said, but men are the gatekeepers of relationship and commitment, and women are the gatekeepers of sex. It's not very difficult for women to get sex. They might not always be able to get sex from the men they would prefer to get it with, but I guarantee if they were so motivated, they could get laid tonight.
Yeah.
Right? A lot of guys are extremely motivated and won't be getting laid tonight. You know, they will be trying very hard and trying all kinds of tactics, and it still won't work, right? So there's this huge asymmetry in the experience of men and women between the availability of sex, okay? So basically, there's this obstruction that men still want sex, right? But like they have to get around it. Now, one of the fundamental premises of the book is that, okay, where do I start with this? Is that people enter into relationships based on a transaction of value, right? People go towards other folks that they want things from, and they don't have anything to do with people they don't want anything from or want nothing to do with. It seems very reasonable to me. And in general, men attempt to exchange resources broadly defined for sexual opportunity, and women use their sexual opportunity for the transaction of resources. So basically, in the economics of the situation, men have something that they really want from women, that women have some measure of control over whether they give it to men or not, namely access to their bodies and sexual opportunity. And so it's like, well, what can you trade for this opportunity on some level? We're not supposed to talk about this in so blatant, explicit terms, and people get very upset because it seems to reduce all of relationships to this materialistic transaction, in which case it's important to remember that resources is not just about money. Like that's just the most obvious tangible example of resource. Resource is anything of value, broadly defined, and it's for the woman to decide what she values. For some women, it will be money. For other women, it will be the willingness to have a family, for instance. Not all men would do that, right? The willingness to marry her. Not all men are going to be willing to do that. Those are values to a woman. Anyway, so the idea here is, well, as a man, let's do business. Like, let's trade. I can give you something that you want, and you might be able to give me something that I want. And I think that's a big driver of why men work longer and harder than women in general in the marketplace. I think that by itself explains, let's say, the gender pay gap more than sexism or discrimination, is that money is valuable to everyone, but it's more valuable to men. Because in general, that money has as many uses as it has to women, plus the use that it can be used to attract and to transact with women for relationships.
Yeah, you can't afford to be broke as a guy.
You need a job if you want to mess with me, right? Isn't that what Eddie Murphy said a long time ago? That's right. I mean, you can, but you have to have other things. It is wrong to think that money is what makes women open up their lives to men.
Yeah, because you said that when you were a broke actor, you got more play than when you were a successful rich doctor.
Yeah, because no one knew who I was as a successful rich doctor for a while. Like, I could have been the best therapist in the world, and only maybe my 30 clients knew that. And I wasn't allowed to talk about that.
Right.
Right. So, on some level, what a waste if I were one of the better therapists in the world to just kind of leave that in obscurity. Right. So, one thing that does seem to be very attractive to women is some measure of the ability to command attention. You can talk about that as being a contextual alpha, which is basically like you are the top dog in your little social hierarchy, no matter how big that is. That's interesting and attractive to most women. So the ability to command attention, the occupation of a high status position within a social hierarchy, those things are more attractive to most women than just pure net worth.
So one thing I'm curious about is then, are all relationships, friends, family, business, are they all just transactional by nature?
I say that all consensual relationships are at heart transactional. So there are non-consensual relationships, which are basically the relationships between parents and children and between siblings. Like, I did not choose to have my sister in my life, and she did not choose to have me. I did not choose my particular parents. They didn't choose to have me. Like, they didn't know who I was or who I was going to be. And we have duties and responsibilities under those circumstances that should be respected because they aren't consensual, right? Though family relationships change when everyone becomes an adult, and you don't have to continue to have a relationship with a family member just because they're a family member. Like, it should be respectful and loving, and it should make your life better, or, don't set yourself on fire to keep somebody else warm on some level, right? But yeah, I think that in general, all consensual relationships are transactional. You get something out of spending time with that person. And if you didn't, or it was a loss to you for too many consecutive occasions, you're going to reevaluate that relationship because it's going to be too expensive for you.
And I think a lot of people might hear that and kind of form like a nihilistic opinion about the world, but I actually think it's honest. Like, for example, you wouldn't fucking be here if I didn't have a channel, right?
Of course.
Like, we are exchanging value. Your fans are coming here. We're exchanging community. Like, there is a good thing about that.
And hopefully we can still be friends.
Yes, of course. But like, I think after a certain age, especially as a man, like there needs to be some sort of value exchange, or else, like, what the hell are you doing?
Yeah, it's interesting you brought that up. So I made an episode about this, about how to make friends as a man, as an adult, because it's very difficult. The older you get, the harder it is to make new friends, especially as a guy. And what I've discovered is that the hack is to be of value to other men. Is that I've met a lot of really interesting people through the YouTube channel. And the pretext is always some sort of collaboration or interview, but then we get to know each other, we fraternize, we become friends over time, and it's almost like the interview is a pretext to hang out.
Yeah.
Because it could be potentially strange or of too great of an opportunity cost to just call up a guy and be like, hey, let's hang out in the middle of a weekday. It's like, dude, I like you, but I got to take care of business over here. So is there a way that we can kind of like hang out and take care of business or create value? It's like, yeah, we can kill two birds with one stone.
Right.
And this is really interesting because, I've been able to get some perspective on, especially really what I imagine really beautiful women's subjective experience to some extent since becoming somewhat famous and successful.
Okay.
Because I made an episode about this too. I think that being famous is like being a woman. Like, that's the closest a man will ever get to knowing what it might feel like to be a beautiful woman. Because like what you just talked about, it's like, I wouldn't be here if we weren't doing this, right? Okay. And why did I accept this invitation? Why did I come all the way out to Austin, Texas on my own dollar to talk to you? Well, because you had a big enough audience and I liked your take, right? Now, I get invited on podcasts every day, sometimes dozens of times a day. But I look into all of them, but I look into some of them and it's like the guy's got 20 followers and he's just started the channel. And he might be an interesting guy, it might be aligned with his mission, but it's like I can't be doing interviews for 20 people at this stage of the game, because if I did that, I wouldn't be here talking to 500,000 people. So the opportunity cost associated with choosing the 20 follower channel over the 500,000 is enormous, right? So it's like I can kind of see what it might be like to be an attractive woman who gets all of this kind of attention from men all the time. I made an episode about this. I call it the $50,000 beer, which is like the reason why you're not going to see really, really conventionally beautiful women on, say, like a dating app, is because they're getting inundated with male attention in their real lives and on social media. The idea that that beautiful woman is just going to accept some random stranger's invitation for a beer at the local bar is never going to happen, because she's also getting invited to the Burj Dubai by some like Italian football player this weekend, and he's going to fly her out first class. So it's like the cost of that beer is $10 for you, but for her, it's a weekend in Dubai with a famous footballer. You know what I'm saying? And she doesn't have to be this shallow, crass, materialistic human being to decide that it's a better option for her to go to Dubai than to have a beer in the dive bar with a random nobody.
Yeah.
It's like, I would do that. They're just not hitting me up, you know? I'd love to hang out with Maradona or something like that. So that's what I'm getting at, is the more optionality that you have, the harder it is to give everyone a chance on some level. And so a lot of guys, they think, oh, this woman, she's just stuck up, or women only care about money or status. And that's not necessarily true, but it becomes harder and harder and harder to justify to herself in her own mind to go out with this guy and not this other guy over here, based on what he could potentially provide. That's just rational. That's not even, people often say that women are irrational. No, women make often very shrewd business decisions. I think in general, women often have this patina of romanticism, but they're kind of,
they're a lot more intuitive than us.
Well, I wouldn't say intuitive, but I would say they're making more practical, rational decisions about who they decide to get into relationships with.
Makes sense.
Whereas men on the surface seem to be, I don't even give a shit, I can do it. But deep down inside, a lot of guys are romantics, and they're just like trying to find that one that they can love and devote themselves to.
So I think that's a good transition into this next question, because you said yourself that it's a woman's best interest to hunt, to be the nastiest, sluttiest versions of themselves with the man that they want.
Sure.
How does this serve a long-term interest if most women want to be married? Most women want to have kids. How does that conflate?
Sure. So the hunting is not necessarily related to being the nastiest, sluttish version of yourself, which I changed the language of that in the book to the richest, creamiest milk that you can provide. But we can use that, whatever language you prefer, because I've said both. The reason those two things are not at odds with one another, for the simple reason that we live in a society, for better or for worse, in which sex precedes commitment. Right? Like, you don't marry someone before you sleep with them.
Yeah.
I don't think, there are vanishingly few people who expect that in today's day and age.
But there's also, I guess, people who are religious, where that kind of becomes like the incentive in a way.
Sure, I've dated religious girls. None of them were virgins. Maybe they had lower body counts than some of the other women, but like,
in fact, sometimes they're probably the nastiest, sluttiest.
They sometimes, but also sometimes they're actually very inexperienced, and they think that their lower body counts are just like inherently valuable, which it can be. Like, sexual jealousy is something that triggers a lot of men, but also like this is a double standard that men should need to examine. They want a woman to be pure, virginal, or at least have a low body count, but they also want her to like do all kinds of nasty, slutty things for him. And how is she going to know how to do those things? She doesn't know how to do them. So the idea is that some women like intuitively know how to do this, even though they've never actually done it with anybody in their lives and they're just waiting for the right man to enact that with, I think is wrong. So it's like, if you want someone who's good at sex, you probably need an experienced person, whether that's a man or a woman. And that obviously comes with pros and cons. So it's like everything is a trade-off. You can't get everything. But sex precedes commitment. Okay. So what I talk about is that one of the best ways for women to get married, to get into a significant relationship, is to act as if that's the furthest thing from their minds. There's this idea that's floating around about intentional dating, which is sort of like and it kind of makes sense on the surface. Like it makes some rational sense, but that's not how people actually make decisions in the sexual marketplace. The idea here is, I'm just going to tell you what I want. I want to get married. I want to have kids. I am an INTJ. I'm a Leo with a Cancer ascendant. My love languages are gifts and acts of service. Like, I'm just going to give you all this information about who I am and what I'm looking for so that we don't have to waste any time. And that just generally doesn't work. It doesn't work for a number of reasons. One is it actually makes the dating process extremely explicitly transactional. It makes it into a job interview, which most people do not want to feel. Like, one of the cardinal sins is making the transaction at the heart of romantic relationships too explicit. Neither the man or the women really want that. Okay, so one of the unspoken rules is you're supposed to kind of like hide some of that stuff. The more explicit it is, the more it feels like we're doing a business transaction. Okay, most people don't want that. It also doesn't work because it's like, okay, how do I put this? There is an asymmetry in the sexual marketplace between the value of sex, which is very cheap these days, and the value of commitment, which is very expensive. And in fact, commitment's getting more and more expensive as people have more and more sex, like with each other. So women often complain that men just want them for one thing. But what the market value of that one thing is pales in comparison to the one thing that women want, which is marriage, family, lifetime commitment. Like, that costs millions of dollars. Whereas,
never heard of that perspective. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think it costs at least six figures to raise one child.
Right.
How much value are you putting into the children and the women? Obviously, that benefits you indirectly to some extent, especially if you're committed to your family, of course. But there's a huge opportunity cost in terms of time, energy, and money that's devoted here and not elsewhere. So it's extremely expensive versus, I think, the market rate for sex, just in terms of sex workers in America, is $200. So it's like, women balk at, like, how dare you just approach me with sex? But it's actually a small ask relative to women who come out of the gate expecting and asking for commitment and provision. Like, imagine if instead of asking for sex, the man asked for $1 million on the first date. And this is what I expect. This is what I'm looking for. I'm looking for $1 million. Like, I don't think a woman would even know how to respond to that, right? So it's, in my opinion, not a good idea for women to lead with, I'm looking for a committed relationship. That also puts a lot of a man's defenses up, because it's like if a woman came and said, I'm looking for $1 million. It's like, oh, okay, well, I mean, that's a lot. So I'm expecting a lot of you now, and I guess we'll see, and things like that. For better or for worse, and there's one more thing to consider, is the women don't want to just get married and have kids. they could do that if they wanted to. They want to get married and have kids with the men they want to get married and have kids with, which are generally the most attractive, let's say 10, 15% of men. And like all the women want those men. So these men, the more attractive they are, the more eligible of bachelors they become, the more optionality they enjoy. And so now the opportunity cost of moving forward with any one woman in a commitment becomes greater and greater because I have to give up everything else, right? So coming right out of the gate with that's my expectation before you even generate any kind of value is just an enormous ask for one of these attractive guys. It's like, I'm not going to give up the 10 women that I'm dating just because you want to have a committed relationship. Because it's wanting is free, as I say. It's free to want something, and it costs me something to give it. So it's like, I'm not saying you'll never get it, but like justify that you will provide me something of equivalent value, or else we really don't have a basis of transaction here. Do you understand?
Yeah.
One more thing I would say about that, which is, so in the context of this, I say that offering the richest, creamiest milk possible is sort of like the Trojan horse. It is what lets a man's guard down, because it's pretty rare for a guy to just say no to a seemingly free, attractive sexual opportunity. Like most guys are not going to pass that up.
Yeah, they'll say yeah.
But most guys, if you come up to them, I'm looking for a committed relationship, I'm looking for marriage, I'm looking for kids, they're going to be like,
yeah, like, oh, chill out.
Yeah, I met 10 minutes ago. You know, so it's like, but if you're like, hey, I think you're really cute, maybe we can have some fun sometime. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, sure. And so that opens the gate, and that woman might have access to that attractive man that she would never get if she led with just what she wanted. It's like, it's poor salesmanship to lead with what you want. Can you imagine getting cold called by some salesman and be like, hey, I'm interested in making my commission?
Yeah, I get shitty emails like all the time of people.
So many bad emails, so many bad pitches.
Yeah.
It's like, obviously you're there because you're self-interested and motivated to make the call, but the only way you get your commission is by, on some level, pretending that has nothing to do with why you're calling me, and demonstrating instead that there's something of value to me to enter into this relationship. That's a smart salesman. You know what I'm saying? So leading what you want with what you want, whether you're a man or a woman, is a terrible, stupid idea. Lead with what the other person wants. And in general, most men want easy going, fun sexual experiences. Like, that's something that is very rare for a guy to turn down. So that's what opens the door. The issue is, and this is true because some women balk, well, Orion, they're just going to have their fun and that'll be it. So how does that lead to marriage and kids? It's like, okay, yeah, that's phase one though. If you get let in and then kicked out, well, that's further along than not being let in at all, right? So you have to be let in to be kicked out. So you actually have solved the first problem, which is securing access to those most attractive men. And you're not going to do that just by asking or demanding what you want, right? You have to give something that he wants. But that's just phase one. What works to open the gates doesn't work to keep you in the city. So if all you have to offer is sex, yeah, you're going to be used as a playmate until the man tires of you. But whose fault is that on some level? It's like, that's not a woman's destiny. So in general, she needs to use sex, because sex precedes commitment in the sexual marketplace today, to open the gates. But once she's inside, she needs to do other things to, let's say, solidify her position in that man's life. And if she doesn't do that, yeah, her tenure there is tenuous.
I see. Interesting. I'm kind of curious too if chat has any counterpoints to that. Because I think, the reason why I wanted to ask that question is I think you probably get a lot of pushback on this question, right? I guess advising women to be the nastiest, sluttiest version for themselves, for the women that they want. I think one thing you said is that, or for the man that they want. One thing you said is that, you only get a few tries, right? As a woman.
Few really good
chances, tries.
Yeah.
In that instance, wouldn't this sort of advice make women shoot more shots that's misguided?
Not necessarily. because it's about giving that rich, creamy milk to the men they really want, right? So one of the things that gets misattributed to me is saying that women should just be wholesale sluts and just like be giving it up to every man who wants sex, which is not what I'm suggesting at all.
So it's being more selective about it.
Extremely selective, way more selective than I see women behaving in today. And that's where the hunting comes in. So I have two general approaches to dating. There's hunting, where you target one specific prey. And then there's fishing, in the sense that we're going to cast a wide net into the water and like haul up a bunch of fish and then choose the ones that seem to be the tastiest and most attractive. So they're very different approaches to dating. And in general, it's better, women are better equipped to hunt than men are. The average woman is way more successful hunting than the average man.
So then why is it that the expectation is for men to approach women?
That's a great question, because even in today's day and age, with all of our enlightened perspectives of gender and power, that one hasn't changed really. And I think for good reason, in the sense that the one who approaches is always in a less powerful position than the one being approached. Just think of the difference between sending out a cold resume to get a job versus responding to a warm offer by a recruiter. It's like you're going to get a much better offer from the recruiter than you would from the cold call, even if you do get a response, and you probably won't. So it's a more powerful position to be the one who responds, not the one who initiates. And I think that's one of the reasons why that hasn't changed.
But do most men even have the luxury to attract a woman if they aren't actively approaching, or if they are not actively hunting?
No. To switch that power dynamic, a man needs to be recognizably famous. Like, that's the thing that changes the game, in my experience. It's not about being powerful. There's plenty of powerful people who are totally invisible. Like, I don't even know their names, let alone what they look like. In fact, real power is invisible.
Yeah.
Right? There's plenty of rich people whose names I know, but again, I don't know what they look like. In San Francisco, the billionaires look like the homeless people too. So it's very hard to tell the difference between them sometimes. But somebody who's famous and can command a great deal of attention for whatever reason, generally because he's competent to some extent, that flips the script and attracts the women to initiate. But as far as I know, it's either you're famous on a wide scale, or you're that contextual alpha, and so you get approached by people within that specific community. Does that make sense? And not every man is going to be famous, right? But every man can find contexts in which he can be a higher status member of that community. And that does help to flip that power dynamic.
But then isn't it important for men to actively practice hunting themselves before waiting for this arbitrary date? Because most men won't achieve a level of fame. Most men won't achieve a level of income to be able to garner that attention.
I see what you're saying. So yes, in general, men, if we're talking about like pickup in real life, men have to approach the women, right? So that looks like hunting, but it's not. Hunting is, I want that particular doe. When a man gets so hung up on, I want that particular doe before he's even approached, he's fucked, because any one attempt is very likely to end in failure. So a man on some level, he gets to be with the best woman who chooses him on some level. So he can go out and approach women, but he shouldn't really be hyper-focused on any one woman, because it's likely she's going to say no, and then now where is he? So even though he might be initiating with specific women, he does so in aggregate. And he's going to move forward with the ones who respond to his advances, because that's where he's most likely to get success. And hopefully he's attractive enough to move forward as well, right? Whereas a woman can be like, I want that guy. And they can often get that guy. Now, hunting is improved the more you understand your quarry. Like, if you're hunting deer, you kind of need to know their habits, where they hang out, what time of day they're active, how they tend to respond to calls or to sounds. The more you understand about your quarry, the more you can set up situations such that you're functionally guaranteed of meat at the end of the day. So I often recommend that women do way more research into their quarries, like snoop on them on social media. If they actually have access to them in real life, like figure out, ask around about them, figure out their habits, their interests, their likes, their dislikes. With a little bit of effort, a woman can present herself in a way that's going to make her very attracted to that particular man. And if she combines that with offering a seemingly attractive, no strings attached sexual opportunity, very few men are going to be able to resist that 1-2 punch. Very few men even get any kind of positive attention from women at all. But if a woman is not only giving him positive attention, but in a very individualized way that fits with his preferences and interests, and seems to just like him as opposed to what he could give her, children, rings, vacations, he's going to be over the moon if he's at least somewhat physically attracted to that woman.
Glad you brought that up, because one thing I've been thinking about is looks, and especially in the context of men. We see a lot of, I'm sure you know about this, a lot of trends recently called Looksmaxing.
Yep.
And it's especially geared towards men.
Sure. Because women have been doing that for fucking years.
Exactly. What do you think about that, right? There's I think a lot of camps, and one kind of predominant philosophy around it is called black pill, where they essentially just say that if you're a certain looks level, you probably shouldn't even focus on dating. I personally think it's a loser mentality, but I'm curious to hear your take. How important is looks for men?
Every person can be more attractive than they currently are. And attractiveness is a form of power that is very particular to dating and sexual relationships. And power is important because the more power you have, the better your optionality, and the more likely you can negotiate better terms for yourself in whatever structure of a relationship you decide to enter into. There's very little downside to throwing money, time, effort, and attention towards increasing your attractiveness. That said, I don't love the maxing part of Looksmaxing because
it's a little weird.
Well, it's kind of a strange word, right? Yeah. But okay, whatever. And because I've found that optimization is never optimized. Optimization is never optimized. It's like at a certain point, the time, effort, energy, and money that I spend to make an incremental gain is significantly greater than any benefit I receive from that gain. So I'm no longer maximizing. I'm actually I'm losing in that capacity. So on some level, it's kind of strange, but optimization generally occurs around 85 to 90%. Once you go past 90%, you're losing in the expenditure of resources relative to the gains that you're making. It's sort of like approaching the speed of light. It requires more and more energy to accelerate less and less as you approach that velocity. So I think the maxing part needs to be chilled out a bit. You generally get your best ROI around 85 to 90%. Now, this black pill idea that if you're not attractive enough, you should just give up dating entirely. Well, I think that, there's a grain of truth to that, but I think it's mostly wrong. The grain of truth is, like I was mentioning earlier, the vast majority of women really only are interested in the top 15% of 20%, if I'm being generous, of men. We've seen from data of revealed preference on dating apps, for instance, that men generally have a normalized distribution with respect to their perception of female attractiveness. Like few women are really not so great, and few women are absolutely beautiful, and most women are kind of average. Makes sense, right? Because we would think that physical attractiveness, just like height, is something that's more or less normally distributed in the population. Women's revealed preference doesn't look like that at all. It's like 0 and then like this around for the last 20%. So on some level, especially on an app, like 80% of men are functionally invisible to women. 80%, 4 out of 5. I mean, that's That's a lot of dudes, right? So if you're one of those dudes, you have to understand, one, that dating apps are not your friend. You're not going to get anywhere that way. And you're likely going to feel frustrated and hopeless the longer you engage with that platform. So dating apps are good for some people for certain reasons, and you need to learn how to use them appropriately as a technology. Okay, so that's one thing I would say. But that doesn't necessarily mean that dating and relationships are completely off the table, especially because things fucking change, man. Things change. It's like, I was a really awkward teenager. You know what I'm saying? If I could go back in time and tell my teenage self that, hey man, just wait. Things get a lot easier and a lot better. I would be like, really? Are you sure? Because they seem really dark and dismal now. I mean, I remember in high school, I was the student council president one year, but I was very unpopular, probably at the bottom of the social hierarchy that year. But I screwed up my courage, and I decided to ask this girl I had a crush on to the dance, and she didn't even respond to me. She just turned pale. Damn. And she ran away. She just ran.
Just ignored your text in person, essentially.
I went to her. This is before texting. This is before cell phones. I went to her in person and said, hey, the dance is coming up. I'd love to take you to the dance. What do you think? And she just blanched and fled.
Just ran away? She
just ran away. And I was just like, oh, man, I guess I'm not going to the dance.
Ran is crazy.
Yeah.
Oh, my.
So, that I could go back in time and tell that young man, look, man, don't worry about it. Just focus on yourself, focus on other things. The tides will change. So one of the things I talk about in the book is that the game changes significantly at 30.
For men
and women, because at 30, according to some of the research, the average man's sexual marketplace value exceeds the average woman's sexual marketplace value for the very first time. For the very first time, and it never changes after that. So the black pill ideology, it seems to me, is very attractive to young men.
Yeah.
Very attractive to young men who are the most unattractive they'll likely ever be in their entire lives until they're old and decrepit. Because, and we don't talk about this very much, being a young man is extremely fucking hard. It's extremely hard. Not only why? Well, the only young men who can really successfully compete with for young women, who are in many cases the most attractive they'll ever be, and are receiving offers from them and their fathers and their grandfathers and all their male cousins. It's like a beautiful 22-year-old has the world by the short hairs on some level, right? And an average 22-year-old guy is probably still getting high and play video games, for better or for worse. So the only 22-year-old guys who have a chance with 22-year-old girls are really attractive dudes. 6'2", kind of, got the abs, very symmetrical looks, super confident, muscular. It's very difficult to get young women as a young man unless you're very attractive. The issue is that it's not that looks don't become relevant, but it does seem that women are less monomaniacally focused on physical attraction than men are.
Right.
And there's other ways that men can be attractive to women. They can be high status. They can be funny. They can be, they can create an interesting and compelling lifestyle and invite the women into that. But any one of those things generally takes a lot of time, energy, and money to cultivate. So if a guy is kind of smart and makes decent decisions and spends 10 years in his 20s learning some skills, building some wealth, creating a lifestyle, working on himself, by the time 30 hits around, he starts to get attention from women, potentially in a way that he'd never gotten attention from women before. Now, at the same token, those women might also start to realize, actually, when I was 22, I thought I'd be young forever. Now I'm 32. I know what 10 years now feels like. It happened faster than I thought, which means I can think about what it's like at 42. Oh, what's it going to be like at 42 and the rest of my life? They start to make more practical long-term decisions. Expecting anyone, man or a woman, to make really good long-term decisions at 21 is insane. I certainly didn't. And the brain
Neither did I.
The brain isn't even fully developed at 21, you
Yeah.
know? But on some level, we're expecting there's some subset of the internet, usually men, are denigrating these young women for not wanting to get married and have kids when the diversity of life is at their fingertips, and they're kind of like lamenting the fact that they don't have any perspicacity for their long-term self-interest. And it's like, who fucking has perspicacity in their long-term
Like,
self-interest?
would those same men do that if they had the level of access that they did?
Exactly. And, you know, Bill Burr has some great bits about that.
You're a big comedy fan.
Comedians understand more about relationships than most psychologists.
They're the philosophers of today.
And they have to talk about the truth, otherwise they wouldn't be funny. And like, one of the reasons why I struggle is because I'm not as funny as these comedians, right? I can't even be too funny. I have to watch it because, you know, when you present yourself as a psychologist, I like to have fun, but sometimes, you know, those two things are opposed to one another. If I could put it in a song or I could make a joke about it, I could say all kinds of shit that I just won't be able to say as a psychologist, right?
Fair enough.
So the black pill. Oh yeah. So the idea here is you might feel hopeless and dejected now, and you might be right. Like, you might not really have much luck in attracting a woman at all, let alone an attractive woman. But you're 22. Like, believing that is your destiny for the rest of your life is wrong.
Yeah.
And the game changes significantly if you devote time to building an emotionally compelling lifestyle, investing in yourself, developing competence, raising your status, and then you can become an attractive man in your like, dating has become easier for me with each passing decade. I shit you not.
And I think that's the point that I want to hammer home, is that I think the black pill, if you take it that way, can allow you to divert your focus on improving yourself. But I think ultimately it just confirms a lot of men's biases where they feel like they don't even have to try anymore. I feel like more so it creates a culture of just loser mentality unless you're able to see the nuances like you just kind of laid out.
Well, let me throw these guys a bone, because I think that it's very easy to dump on these guys and call them names. But I think really if we're going to be, if we're going to give them the most generous interpretation, they're people who are in pain, who have been having a hard time. So for a couple of years, I worked at a cancer clinic, and I was a therapist for folks who were diagnosed with cancer and their caregivers. And one of the things that I learned in my time there is that people have a very ambivalent relationship to hope.
Okay.
We don't like to admit it, but we're all going to die at some point. And some folks have gone through treatment after treatment, and it's been painful and it's been expensive, and their health is still declining, and they see the writing on the walls and they say, you know what? I've given up hope of getting better. And everyone crosses that point in objective fact. Like, there will be no saving either any one of us at some point. And what I've discovered is that can be very uncomfortable to their spouses and to their children, who might say, you have to fight. I'll miss you too much. You don't give up. There's still hope. And what I've learned is it's not for anyone else to decide for anyone else when hope should be surrendered. Like, that's something that every person has to do within their own heart. And that can lead to some sort of peace and acceptance on some level, right? The issue is there's a big difference between going through all kinds of treatments and running out of interventions and then giving up the hope when the cancer is metastasized, versus, like, maybe you got a stage 1 diagnosis and you've tried like one thing. Like, I don't think it's really appropriate to give up hope in that situation. So it's like, how much have you really gone through? What are your long-term prognoses? What are things that you haven't yet tried? Because if we're honest with ourselves, we haven't tried everything to be as successful as we might want. And can you really look at yourself in the mirror knowing that you haven't done everything that you possibly could to get what you want. Like on some level, if you give up too soon, you live in bad faith. And that means that if you're more committed to that decision, then you have to attack and put down anybody who tries to rekindle that hope, because they make you, it's like a rekindling of that pain. I don't want to feel that anymore. I'm just going to decide that it's hopeless because I feel less pain that way. Fair enough. Fair enough. But like, are you sure that you're going to be that way forever? Are you sure that you've tried everything? Probably not, but it's not for me to decide.
It's a very interesting perspective. Yeah. I think that's where I always come back to, is that, have they really tried everything? I don't think so. Well, if they're spending a lot of their time watching these videos, but that is a very, very interesting perspective.
At 22, 23, like by definition, they can't have tried everything. Right. Because they certainly haven't tried being 30.
Right.
They certainly haven't tried devoting themselves to developing some sort of competence or lifestyle. Everybody can be more attractive than they currently are.
I want to kind of open it up a little bit to the chat. I still have a lot of questions. And are you good on time, by the way?
Oh, I'm having a great time.
Yeah. I do want to open it up. I did see a donation from someone that said, how do you date a woman with trauma? It's kind of a big question. But.
Well, I probably wouldn't.
Okay.
I wouldn't.
I mean, yeah.
Like some people are going to be really upset by that, but there's this idea, I don't know where we get it from, but like everyone deserves a partner or should be able to date and have a relationship. And that's not fucking true. It's like if I had a broken leg, nobody would think that I deserve to be on the varsity team. It doesn't mean that I'll never get to play, but maybe I need to heal and go through physical therapy before I can be in good enough shape to be of use to my team. And until that happens, it makes sense that I'm benched. So people have all kinds of issues and traumas and things like that. That doesn't mean that they'll never get to play, but maybe it's not the time for them to play right now. Maybe that's a little selfish. Maybe they need to take some time to heal and go through the equivalent of physical therapy, and so they can actually be more present and available to a partner in a potential relationship. And from the other hand, it's like there are 4 billion women in the world, man, and not all of them are traumatized. So it's like that is an uphill battle right from the start. Like that relationship isn't going to be easy and effortless and smooth and peaceful. It's very difficult to date somebody with mental issues and expect a smooth, peaceful, loving, satisfying relationship. But not all women have mental issues. So you don't have to shame them. I hope that they get the help that they need and they heal, and hopefully they're back in the game before you know it. But like, you don't have any obligation to be with somebody who on some level can't truly be present and available to you because they're preoccupied with something else emotionally. That would be my take.
Chad, do you guys have any questions specifically? Let's see here. I think I saw a couple. Yeah, how do you date a woman with lots of trauma? That was the question.
And the reason why men end up dating women with trauma is because they've already decided, I want this woman. And then they find out that she has trauma. And they're like, oh, fuck. Okay, so that's why, in general, it's a good idea for men to resist the urge to emotionally invest in a woman until 6 months have passed, minimum. Generally closer to 12 months.
So don't commit to a relationship until 6 months of dating?
I wouldn't commit to a relationship, but what I'm really talking about here is less moving your mouth and saying, hey, we're an exclusive relationship, and more about emotionally investing in another person. Because men and women get their heart broken by people that they're not in relationships with all the time, because they didn't define the relationship, but they still emotionally invested in the other person. And now they're really screwed because they might have decided, I love this person, I want this person. The other person might not even think that they're in a relationship with them, let alone the kind of relationship that the first person would like to have, right? So I'm not saying that people are liars, though they often are. If we're going to give the most generous interpretation, is that if I'm attracted to you, I'm going to want you to like me. And so I am going to show you what I think you want to see because I want you to like me. That isn't necessarily, though, who I am. And in my experience, after about 6 months, if there's some sort of regularity and routine, people start to relax a bit and you start to begin to see who that other person actually is. This is especially true if you're attracted to them in return, because you're going to be distorted through the lens of limerence.
Right. That's why there's a honeymoon period too, right?
Exactly. And I talk about in the book the first crisis that all relationships must pass through is the crisis of disillusionment, where either because of one big reveal or small inconsistencies over time, you realize that the person that you're actually relating to isn't the person that you thought they were, which happens to everybody. Why are you even on a date with this person and not some other person? You might not even know that other person. We date strangers in our culture today, right? You're there because you're attracted to who you to what you see, and
the idea that you created about them,
who you think that other person is. And the likelihood that that idea accords with who they are in reality is functionally zero. But you're there because of what you want to see there, what you hope to see there, and by a lot of projections that you're putting into someone based on their physical attractiveness, okay? But over time, you get disabused of those things, and then it all kind of shatters, and you begin to see the other person for who he or she truly is. And that's really when the relationship begins. You weren't in a relationship with another person until then. You were in a relationship with an idea of a person. But once that shatters and you see the other person, you're like, okay, is there actually enough here in reality to justify a successful relationship? If not, a lot of people bail. A lot of people bail because they just don't feel the same way, or the magic is gone, or I don't feel it anymore. And other times they're like, okay, there is a kind of a grieving. There's a little disappointment that can happen. It's not the other person's fault. We have to take responsibility for that. But the decision now is, okay, based on who I think that you might be, I do think that we can get along. I do think there's some sort of compatibility, and I do think we want more or less the same thing, so let's go for it. Until that happens, you're not in a relationship with somebody. And that can take 6 to 12 months minimum to occur. So it's important not to get too invested in somebody before you even know who they are. Otherwise, you're just rolling the dice, and then, it's like you're going all in before you look at your cards. And you're like, fuck, bipolar with childhood trauma. And it's like, okay. All right, let's see if I can play this hand as best I can.
So one person said, not a question, but this is one of the very best Orion interviews, and I've been listening daily since February.
Thanks, man.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I'm going to keep looking at some questions here. Let's see. Maybe we can do some rapid fire ones. Someone had a dono. How is
anesthetization?
And relaxation different? Is it ever okay to
anesthetize? Yeah. Everything has its use. Let's put it that way. Like cocaine is used in eye surgeries, for instance. Like there's very few things that are so evil and bad that they have no practical use under any circumstances whatsoever.
Okay.
Sometimes anesthesia, which is anything that numbs a person against their own feeling experience, is useful. And there's many, many forms of anesthesia. This could be drugs and alcohol, but it can also be sitting in front of a screen and binging a show. It can mean filling the emptiness inside with food. It can be chasing excitement through dopaminergic activities like gambling or just sex for the sake of sex. There's many, many different ways to anesthetize. And I do think that under some circumstances, it's useful to be able to have forms of anesthesia. I had a colleague in one of my internships. He was born in Ukraine. He had unanesthetized orthodontic surgery when he was 8. They didn't have anesthesia in his country. They cut out 6 of his teeth as a child.
That's
crazy. Can you imagine how painful that might be?
It sounds like Eastern Europe, though.
Oh, man.
It sounds like it.
I
sounds about right.
It. But it's like, thank God I don't have to feel every moment of pain.
Yeah.
Like, that's useful. That said, we generally don't need as much of that as our culture seems to offer us. And a lot of that anesthesia is very freely available and easily accessible. And that can keep people locked in a stasis for a long time. The issue with this is this isn't going to be super scientific, though there's some basis for this, like in The Body Keeps the Score, that if you don't feel your feelings, they kind of get locked somewhere inside of your body. And it doesn't matter if that feeling is from yesterday or from 50 years ago. If you don't feel your feelings, it's like frozen somewhere inside of your physical structure. And that is actually what trauma is. Trauma is not an experience. It's not something outside. If an experience could be traumatic, then everyone who experienced that would be traumatized.
It's your perception of it, right?
Some people are really hurt by some experiences. Other people, for some reason, are very resilient. They kind of, it hurts, but they dust themselves off and move on. The trauma, someone is traumatized when they stop moving. When like their subjective experience gets frozen, they can't feel it because it's too overwhelming and painful. And so it kind of gets frozen. Their chronological age progresses, but their emotional or psychological age remains unchanging on some level. This is why a lot of people, they're walking around, they're 30, they're 60, they might have psychologically, they might be 7 years old. They might be 12 years old, So never confuse psychological maturity with chronological age. That's something that we all do from time to time. But the idea here is we can't keep moving forward. We can't keep growing. On some level, we're not even in reality if we can't bring our emotional sensitivity up to the present moment, if we're still frozen by these previous experiences, right? So on some level, we have to feel it to heal it. It must be true because it rhymes, right? That's a therapeutic aphorism. So you have to feel it to heal it. What I often say is that the feeling, like the subjective experience of an emotion, is that emotion leaving you. It's like when you vomit. When you taste the food again, it's coming out of you. If you don't taste it yet, it's not coming out of you on some level. So the feeling, no matter how painful or difficult or distressing it is you getting rid of it. And as far as I know, God, I wish there was a way around this. There's no way around this. You have to feel the emotion to let go of it. And some people, they have decades of emotional debt. Have you ever been in financial debt?
Yeah.
It's fucking hard to get out of financial debt because those interest rates are so high and the money first goes to your interest. And it's like, it can take years and years to get out of financial debt. And with each passing month or each passing day that you're not repaying your debt, you're accruing more of it. Same thing with the heart, same thing with the psyche. We're accruing emotional debt that just will be bigger and more massive in terms of its repayment the longer we delay. So that's the danger of anesthetization. One final word about relaxation. So most things that people think are relaxing actually aren't relaxing. They think they're relaxing, but they're not in terms of the body's actual physiological response. The most common example of that is alcohol.
Alcohol, yeah.
Alcohol is a neurodepressant. So in the intoxication phase, it does feel relaxing, but the body, in its attempt to restore homeostasis, is like pushing up against that underneath and behind the alcohol, so that when it burns off, you're actually hyper activated. Like there's an intense sympathetic response where people can be sweating, their heart is racing. That's why alcohol is one of the only two drugs that it can literally kill somebody to withdraw from without appropriate medical supervision, okay? That kind of roller coaster is not relaxing. When you just scroll, anybody who's fallen down a rabbit hole on Instagram or social media, check in with yourself. Do you feel better after an hour of that?
I had my Instagram permanently banned for 2 months or so. It was amazing.
Were you a bad man? What happened?
I don't even know. They didn't even give me a goddamn reason, but it was nice. I wasn't even sweating it. I was
Oh,
like, I mean, I kind of need it for my business to like reach out to people like you, makes that easier. But it was like, this is nice.
Oh, there's definitely real benefits. Like a drug dealer, it's a good idea to not get high on your own supply. So I don't have any of those apps on my phone.
No, it's smart.
And I've had to take breaks from social media entirely from time to time too, when I felt myself too reflexively reaching for my phone. It's an addiction, basically. Yeah. So a lot of the things that people think are relaxing, if they actually check in with themselves, they don't feel more peaceful and afterwards. Yeah. It's not like a massage. A massage is relaxing. Listening to the rain is relaxing. Like simple, pleasant, attenuated experiences are generally relaxing. Not intense experiences or bombarded with imagery. That's not relaxing for your mind or your body. And we generally need much less relaxing than we think that we do.
Interesting.
I need like an hour a day max.
So just so you guys know, I am reading your comments and staying as present as possible too. Thank you for those who have donated. Of course, I don't want to interrupt his flow. He's saying some very interesting stuff. So trust me, I'm doing my best to like balance it all. But I'm going to continue on with like the interview. Do you need like a bathroom break or anything?
No, I'm good.
No, you're good?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
As long as people don't get tired of listening to my voice.
Yeah, chat. Thank you guys for the people who've been staying for this whole time. The numbers stay like really consistent, so that's always good. So I think one thing that I wanted to kind of hop into is the kind of transactional aspect about relationships.
Sure.
This is why I personally don't think that true generosity exists. Is that the fact that we as humans, we feel good for doing things to other people. I'm glad that it's set up this way because it allows us to do more generous things. So in that same vein, I think a lot of relationships at the core of it are transactional, but I don't view it in a bad way. I'm really glad that as humans, we're wired this way. I truly, truly do. With that said, do you feel like your advice though does apply to people who have already had years of a successful marriage, who have for years kind of stayed the course? Do you feel like your advice applies to those people, or do you think it's more geared towards initial attraction and getting into that relationship?
No. There's a whole chapter on the book a couple chapters on the book on maintaining relationships. It's really, really important. Like, why conquer a castle if you can't keep it? I talk about the 3 phases of relationships. Every relationship goes through these 3 phases, whether they last for a night or for a lifetime, and they are attraction, negotiation, and maintenance. And for better or for worse, we have an inordinate amount of attention paid to attraction. And that makes sense because you have to solve that problem before you can get to negotiation, and you have to solve that problem before you get to maintenance. So there's attrition at every level of the relationship funnel. There's going to be fewer people dealing with the problems of maintenance at any given point in the population than people dealing with attraction.
Sure.
Okay. So that makes sense. But we're still inordinately focused on attraction, I guess, because people still haven't figured that out yet. Okay, fair enough. But just because a marriage hasn't broken up doesn't necessarily mean that it's successful. That's another thing.
Yeah.
So about 55% of marriages end in divorce, but of the ones that stay together, another half are kind of unhappy,
right? Which
I don't see as a victory, to be honest.
Right.
So if we're being very generous, it seems like 1 in 4 marriages seem to be okay. I also will interject here that I think it's a moment for us all culturally to consider that the longevity of a relationship is not an indicator of its success. Like, just because you don't break up doesn't mean that the relationship is a good one or a fulfilling one or even a healthy one. And I think we should get more generous collectively with the idea that actually sometimes relationships have their season, and this person might have been really good for you for this stage of your life, and maybe it's no longer appropriate to try to fit the square peg in the round hole. It's like hanging out with some of your high school buddies. It's like by this stage of your life, you've probably taken very different paths. I bet if you met today, you wouldn't be friends, right? You can't make new old friends, so it's good to keep them in your life. But it's not helpful to try to keep people when it no longer is in either one's best interest to do so. So that's another thing I would say. My argument would be, if a relationship lasts and it's fulfilling and loving and successful, it's probably because of some of the things I discussed in the book, which is The two people are still very attracted to each other. The two people provide complementary value to each other. The two people are engaged with wanting the best for their partner. And I think those three things, just by themselves, can maintain relationships over the long run.
Interesting. But do you feel like, if I may just challenge you,
of course,
like the fact that we may overly view relationships as transactional, do you think this will make it less likely for someone to persevere the natural challenges and peaks and valleys that we do have in a relationship? Do you feel like in that kind of transactional mindset, we're always looking for better? We're always looking for the next big thing?
Well, it does make it harder. But what I would say is that it's not that people need to think consciously about this transactional model. The whole point of the model is that people do this unconsciously outside of their awareness all the time. On some level, we can't not do it because everyone has goals, things that they want. And so they're constantly sort of evaluating people, things, opportunities to see how relevant they are to helping them get their needs met or getting what they want. And we do this unconsciously all the time.
If I may interject, it's like whenever you meet someone, especially in America, the first thing you kind of ask is, oh, what do you do? And sometimes I think people say that to evaluate the respect that they want to give to another person.
Sure. But let me give you a better example with respect to long-term relationships. So a lot of marriages go through a crisis around the time when the kids are launched. Like they're all out of the house. They're in college or they've started their own lives. Why? Well, I have this phrase that like no one continues to pay the plumber. When your toilet is clogged, a plumber is in very high demand. After the plumber does his work, you don't keep him around, and you certainly don't continue to pay him for the job that he did in the past. So for better or for worse, a lot of people enter into marriages because they want to have families and they want to raise children. Great. Well, the children are raised. Well, now what? You might only be in your 40s or 50s. You could have another 40 fucking years of marriage left. That is a lifetime still. And you can't coast on the fact that you unclogged the toilet back in the day. Do you understand?
Right.
It's like you can't coast on previously created value. So if there's not another way for them to fit in each other's lives, if there's not some sort of overarching mission that they're collaborating towards, maybe they've just like, we're good friends, we've raised our children, and we're just going to go our separate ways. That often happens at that stage of the game because they don't have anything else that they need to do together. They haven't found that anyway.
So it's very important to always have a common purpose and a goal. That's what keeps a lot of relationships together. I think that's, for example, why a lot of religious families tend to stay together, right?
Yes. Having a common overarching mission or a goal for your relationship is very, very helpful. But in general, we need to continue to need things from each other. And if I primarily chose a woman because I thought she would be a good mother and she would be maternal and kind in the raising of children, then I don't really need those qualities in a partner anymore once the children are raised. So the sad reality is that woman might become less attractive to that man, not because she was bad or a poor partner, but because she gave the man what he wanted. The plumber unclogged the toilet, and in so doing became much less valuable to the customer. So the way to continue to maintain value is you have to continue to be needed by your partner. Sometimes that means creating needs that weren't there to begin with. Advertisement does that all the time.
Dive into that a little bit in a tangible sense.
Well, like in a Coke commercial, how does it generally start? It's a hot summer day and everyone's sweating and parched, and then the Coke shows up. If it's the other way around, it doesn't really work. So one of the first rules of advertisement is you create a problem, and then you solve the problem with your product. So the same basic thing is true. It's like a lot of people have this problem. I want to have a family. I can't do that by myself. right? So I have a problem, and I'm going to attract and vet a person to solve that problem. But once that problem is solved, in order to justify keeping that person around outside of just obligation, which I don't think is enough, to be honest. It's certainly not the highest that we should aspire to, is just discharging our obligation until we die. Then I need new things from that person. And if I can't find new things to need, I'm going to find somebody else, most likely.
Interesting.
So I've done a number of consultations with middle-aged women recently, and that's one of the things that I recommend to them. It's like, in order to stay relevant, if you really value this relationship and you want to keep this marriage intact, you need to create a different project with your husband now that the kids are gone. It's like, maybe you start a business, or you found a nonprofit, or you rescue animals and you foster them, or you decide, we're going to tour the world and start a travel blog channel. It's like, it doesn't matter. There's like dozens and dozens of ways to solve this problem, but you need to get aligned with something that you both desire, and you both need to be needed by the other person continually. And as soon as that need disappears, the relationship is on the rocks. I was doing a consultation with a woman once.
Actually, before you do that, I do want to say that's a very important point. What you just said is that this is a way in which you can view, I guess, the transactional nature of relationships in a positive light. Is that the fact that we need each other is a good thing, right? Like a successful relationship, partnership, whatever, it's only successful if both parties can come together and create something amazing together, right? Like the fact that we need each other is very important, I feel like.
Yes, and that's what's dating so difficult. It's like, if I just think of the commercial marketplace, I can tell from the name of the store, there's nothing I need in that store. I'm not going to go into that store, because the time that I spend going into that store where I already know I need nothing there is time I could have gone into some other place where I could get a need discharged or a desire fulfilled, right? So one of the most dangerous things about relationships and the dating market in general is this sense of, I don't need my partner, or I don't need a man, or I don't need a woman. If that's true, good luck forming a long-term relationship. Need is the pretext to bring people together. I once did a consultation with a woman, and she was having difficulties in her marriage, and she was like, I just don't understand. Like, I have my own money from an inheritance. It's like, I'd be fine on my own. I don't need my husband for anything. And I said, even if that's true, don't ever say that to him. Don't ever make him feel as if you need nothing from him. And she was like, why? Isn't that a good thing? It's like, I'm not putting this obligation or expectation on him. It's like, yeah, I can see that. There's some truth to that. But a man, he's married to you. He's the sole breadwinner. You don't work. He's going out every day and bringing home the money to provide for you and a lifestyle. If you just turn around and say that you don't need him anymore, then his sacrifice becomes worthless and valueless, and he's going to feel completely heartbroken and like a schmuck. Because why would he continue to invest in a woman who seems not only to not appreciate the things that he does give her, but it's not necessary to do so, because she'd just be fine on her own. And in general, we've come to a place where a woman doesn't need a man, and a man doesn't need a woman. Men need lots of women around. Like, without a bunch of women, we would not be able to replace our population, and civilization would go extinct. Women need a lot of men around to like maintain the infrastructure and build things and take care of things, but like, you don't necessarily need a man or a woman anymore. That's the unpleasant reality of modern dating. I did a consultation with a guy who, when his wife told him that she wanted a divorce, and he asked why, she said, I can get everything I need from you on TaskRabbit and Tinder. Oof. Which obviously, emotionally eviscerating.
I'm hurt hearing that.
But we have to understand, leaving aside the brutality of that comment, that there's some truth to that. Like, what do we generally need from our partners? Sex, intimacy, There's an app for that. Oh, well, I need like instrumental support and lifestyle provision. There's an app for that. Or I need someone to like take care of things or give me rides or help with the childcare. There's an app for that. Like every one of those needs can be discharged in a commercial relationship with a great deal of convenience at your fingertips through your phone. There's very few things that can't be bought.
Yeah.
Love cannot be bought, and friendship and loyalty. Those are the things that I talk about in chapter 9 of my book, the non-transactable goods. And those are some of the best, most noble qualities that human beings can possess and aspire to. But that's not generally why people go into relationships with each other. They get into relationships and they stay in relationships with people they need and want things from.
So let's dive into that, because you called me out before starting the stream that you said that my thumbnail that I made for you was clickbaity. So let's clear that up so we can kind of get into what exactly love is. Because I think you previously said love isn't soft or cuddly.
No.
And can be found in something that you actually find in the gutters. While relationships need rules and boundaries. What is love?
Well, it's a question that I've examined myself to some extent in my life. And the way I approached this question is I tried to remove everything from the concept of love that has another name. So, for example, there are components of love that have to do with attraction and arousal and stimulation and desire, but all those have different names. And you can certainly have desire without love and love without desire. So they're clearly not the same thing. And so I began to separate out all these different associations and components to love to see like what doesn't have some other name. And the thing I got to at the end of the day was that love is the humiliated self exultant. It is a pathway to spiritual evolution. And it is not easy and it is not pleasant. The idea that love is a warm, fuzzy feeling inside doesn't make any sense if we're being intellectually honest. Like, for example, one of the most famous, well-known aphorisms about love comes from Jesus, and he tells people to love your enemies. How do you feel positively about someone who's trying to kill you? Like, are you psychotic? Do you think that's what Christ was doing up on the cross? He was just like, hey guys, this is great, man. I just love to be, I'm happy to be included. I like this. No, it's not. But yet this wise man seemed to believe that it was not only possible, but necessary to love your enemies, which I think is our clue that love doesn't have to do with a positive feeling. I think love has to do with a unwavering commitment to the well-being of the other, especially if it comes at some sacrifice to the self.
Okay.
And I mean, love is very unruly. It is very dangerous because you can love people who hate you. You can love people who abuse you. You can love people who exploit you. People do every day. Like a relationship, love wants what's best for the other and thinks little of itself. That's why I hate the concept of love languages. That is just, it's a misnomer. Those are at best desire languages.
Okay.
Because love is not about getting what you want. It's not. Love is not about, can you imagine a mother saying that to a child?
Yeah.
It's about, sweetie, I don't really feel loved by you. I like gifts and acts of service. Love is about putting your own needs aside and doing what is best for the other person. Sometimes and often at great sacrifice to yourself. Okay? So love is not about getting what you want. It's about helping the other person get what they want, or even better, to get what they need, which is not always what they want, or often what they want.
So in the transactional nature of relationships, it seems like love can only exist when it's something that's not consensual, like a parent and a kid.
No. And in fact, many non-consensual relationships aren't loving. Like the idea that all parents love their children and all children love their parents is not correct. I can tell you that as a therapist. I learned that in the first week.
Yeah.
But what I do say is that love and relationships have nothing to do with one another. They're two totally different ideas, right? So think about, if my conception of relationships is correct, it's basically that we enter into a relationship when we exchange value with one another, which on some level is kind of a form of doing business. So businesses need rules, they need definitions, they need boundaries. But imagine applying those terms to love and saying, no, you can't love this person, you have to love here because that's what the rules say. Or you can't love anyone that's not your wife or that's not your husband. Like there are boundaries there. Can you imagine Christ on the cross saying, boundaries, guys, come on, this isn't cool anymore. So like there's a sacrifice that is generally required in love where the self is diminished, like the egoic self is diminished to make more space for, let's say, benevolence and goodness, which I think is the closest that we kind of get to love, right? So love laughs in the face of rules. It laughs in the face of boundaries and definitions. It loves where it wants to love. And that's what love is. It's always given as a gift. It doesn't come with strings attached. Otherwise, it's just transaction disguised as love, which is very dangerous.
But like I outlined earlier, like, is there even such thing as true generosity? Is there something that there is no strings attached?
Yeah, it's pretty rare because you got to something that a lot of philosophers have discussed, which is if being a good person makes me feel kind of warm and fuzzy inside, isn't that kind of a reward? Aren't I chasing that good feeling or that preferred sense of self? And I think you can make that argument. It's like, that's why they say at the highest level that virtue must be its own reward. And the most virtuous people perform virtue even when it doesn't feel good. Like that's the highest test of whether someone loves or whether someone is virtuous, is that they do it even if not only do they get nothing in return, but they don't even feel good when they're doing it.
It's against their best self-interest or desires.
Yeah. And,
interesting.
And vanishingly few people pass that test. So while I don't think that love is bullshit by any extent of the imagination, but what a lot of people consider to be love is bullshit. That's why we have to be very careful with our words and kind of parse out what we really mean when we say certain things. Because generally, when do people say that they love something? To be honest, it's when they get a lot of what they want and not a lot of what they don't. When people get a lot of what they want and not a little of what they don't, they love that thing or person.
Oof, man, you got me thinking. Why do so many men fall in love with prostitutes, OnlyFans creators, and strippers?
Yeah, it seems like not even a month goes by where I'm not doing a consultation with some man who's fallen in love with one of those.
It's that common.
Yeah, apparently. Yeah, apparently.
Are they often married?
I would say most of the time not. Most of the time these men are not married. Sometimes they are, but most of the time they're not. And I think that's part of what leaves them vulnerable. I think married men might have affairs, but few married men are actually going to leave their partners for their lovers. They kind of know this is where I get my nutrition and sustenance, and this is dessert on some level. And I'm not going to, if I get rid of dinner and I just focus on dessert, I'm going to get a tummy ache. So why do so many men fall? Well, because what do these women do well? They, if they're good at what they're doing, they're not only going to provide a very high quality sexual experience with low expectations or strings attached. I mean, you often pay for it, but then, you forget about it. And they can be really good at, sussing out what this particular client how they want to be treated. This client might want to be dominated and stepped on and made to feel like a little worm. This one might actually just want to be listened to and to be given the sense that he's a good person. A lot of prostitutes, they don't even sleep with their clients. They just get taken out because the guy kind of wants to be seen with that woman or wants to talk to a woman and feel an emotional connection with them, right? So it's like these women who are servicing many men get attuned to what this particular man wants and needs, and they give it to him, which is not an experience that most men get from anybody, let alone any women. Most women are like, what can you do for me, guy? And here's a relationship. Yes, they're paying for it, but they are getting what they need and want from a woman, and that's intoxicating. Most women don't even care what men want or need. That's irrelevant. But these professionals, they cater to men's needs and desires. And some of them are very attractive and very talented at discharging those needs and wants.
So I got a question from the chat. Do you expect to see policy changes to the unfair family court system? Will this come before alternative marriages? Might Dems run on this to win over males? It's an interesting question.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to see policy changes in the family court system anytime soon, because whether it's true or not, I think that any attempts to make some of these either their laws or their statutes or just precedents, more equitable for men will be seen as anti-woman and against women. And sometimes that's true. Sometimes it is sort of a zero-sum game. Like if I, as a man getting divorced, keep more of my money, it might mean that the woman gets less of my money. That's a zero sum. So unfortunately, I think that in order for any changes to be made, there needs to be a better, let's say better branding for men. Like when I remember a long time ago when I was a kid, like the debates about around abortion have been going on for decades. But when I was a kid, I remember it was pro-choice and anti-abortion, which was not good marketing. It's better to be pro. That's why today we see it's pro-choice and pro-life. They're both for something, right? We could say it's anti-life and anti-choice,
right?
Or we could say it's pro-choice and pro-life, and that's better marketing. So unfortunately, the powers that be control a lot of that definition. And so making concessions or changing some of this, I think, is going to just be seen as anti-woman, which I don't think it necessarily is, obviously. But I do think that alt marriages are on the rise and will be the future.
Interesting. So a couple more questions here. So Bahi asked, let's see. He wants to know if he should prioritize his looks or money or what. And the question that he's essentially asking is, what are the best ROI things to do to increase your attractiveness in the sexual marketplace?
Is this a man?
I'm going to guess so.
Okay. The easiest way for men to get like 1 point more attractive in the sexual marketplace, you could do it in a weekend, is to level up your look. Like get at least 2 or 3 good outfits. If you don't know anything about fashion, you don't know what fits your body type or what colors look good on you, enlist a sister or a female friend, or even hire somebody. Like it's worth it. You could throw a couple $1,000 at this problem in a weekend and increase your attractiveness by 1 point. Like it's amazing. I resisted this for so long because I used to think that paying so much attention to your clothes and was just sort of like shallow and superficial. It's like, fuck it. I don't care anymore. It's like I've seen the difference in treatment that I receive just because I'm putting on a nicer outfit.
Yeah.
It's like at that point, once you realize that it's stupid not to do it.
Yeah.
So I think that's the easiest way for men to become more attractive is just learn a little bit about fashion and increase your sartorial sense.
If I could add to that, like actually before Orion came to my house, I was just picking up some stuff at the Whole Foods. Like 2 people, one was a gay guy, which is the highest of
Ooh,
compliments.
What praise?
He was like, "Dude, you have a great fashion. I love your jacket," and it was good. I was like, that means a lot, man.
Nice.
Coming from a gay guy, like that means a lot.
They often do have much better fashion sense.
They have good taste. They have good taste.
Best looking dudes in San Francisco are almost all gay.
Yeah, right. Oh yeah, you're from San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
Someone asked, so how can you truly know or test if you love someone and someone loves you? It's a great question. Good questions, y'all.
I mean, there's a way to do it. I don't know if you really want to go out of your way to test it, because testings always come at some sort of cost. Like, it's not free to do anything, no matter what that is. And to run a test on whether you love someone or someone loves you is actually going to be very expensive if you want to get really good information. You will know how much you love someone by what you're willing to give up in order to either retain the relationship or for the other person's best interests. On some, this is a really interesting idea. Love only wants what's best for the other, which means that in the vast majority of cases, the lover must surrender the possibility of a relationship with the one they love. Why? Because the likelihood that a relationship with you is the best possible thing for the person you love is probably not true. You would have to be the very best person on the planet for that other person for that to be true. And let's be honest, you probably aren't. So it's the final act of love to be willing to surrender a relationship or a connection with the loved one. And that's why we see that happen in all of the archetypes of romantic love in our literature and film. One of the best examples of that is Casablanca, where at the end of the movie, Rick puts the woman he loves on a plane with another man because she knows it's what's best for her, insisting that I should get what I want ahead of what's best for the loved one isn't love, it's selfishness. So this is a real paradox. It's kind of like why we say, if you love something, set it free. Well, what if the best thing for the other person is not to be in a relationship with you? Then you have to choose, like, do I want to get what I want, or do I want to give the other what's best for them? And they often are not the same things. Now, you might suggest that the best accommodation to that reality is, if you really love someone and you understand that you're probably not the best thing for them, then at the very least, you should do everything you can to be the best version of yourself for that other person, which generally means that you treat them as best you can, and that you show up as attentive and effortful and attractive as you possibly can be.
One person asked, do you attract, or okay, I guess what he's saying is, are attractive guys polarizing? Do they have a kind of hate me or love me mentality?
They can. What I often recommend to guys is that, I have an episode about this. It's called Most Men Are Wallpaper. The vast majority of men do not stand out from the undifferentiated mass of men. And that's dangerous. It's dangerous. There's no greater risk for a man than not taking a risk, because life will pass a man by if he doesn't stand out from the undifferentiated mass one way or the other, either by being smarter, by being more talented, more capable, more attractive. You have to stand out, or else you literally are not seen by the female sex.
Yeah.
Okay?
Most men are invisible. Yeah.
So what I recommend is that men lean a little bit into their visibility. It's been totally reversed in human culture relative to nature. In nature, it's the men, the males, who are almost always the spectacular, visible sex. It's like peacocks are glamorous, not peahens. Peahens are brown and drab, and they got nothing special because actually they want to blend in, camouflage, because we want to protect the females because they're the seat of reproduction and progeny, right? So we don't want them to stand out. That makes them the target for predation. But that's one of the trade-offs, is like standing out and being more visible as a sexual opportunity also makes you more visible for predation. And so that's the cost-benefit analysis there. But in our societies, it's usually the men who look drab. You know, you go to any black tie event and we're all looking like penguins, and every woman is a beautiful, unique orchid in her dress, right? So for some reason, we've reversed that. I think it's good idea for men to learn a little bit about their appearance and to lean into that. Don't be afraid to take a little bit of a risk in that regard. I say to men, in general, it's better for you to be more attractive to 1% of the female population than to be less attractive to 99. Because women generally want their single best option. It's better to be the first choice of one woman than to be the second choice for all other women. It's going to be you're always going to be the also ran. You're always going to be you're a great guy. I'm sure there's a wonderful woman out there for you.
That's like the worst compliment to get, by the way. Like if someone leads with, oh yeah, he's a really nice guy. Like, oh my God, call me an asshole at least.
They probably don't mean it that way, but it does
right,
hurt.
You know what
it?
I mean?
Yeah.
But I think like to go off your example, it's kind of like why, you know, there's guys like Pete Davidson or like that Machine Gun Kelly guy, where maybe a lot of women might not view them as like traditionally, conventionally attractive, but they absolutely do kill it like with a certain look of woman. Maybe Pete Davidson's not the best side. Like,
well, let's talk. We can talk about Pete for a second.
Okay.
So I actually almost called it the Pete Davidson effect in my book, but instead I called it the Playboy Bunny principle. Pete Davidson is interesting. I've never met him. I don't know much about him, but I was curious because, he's not a conventionally attractive guy, and he was dating some very beautiful women, right? He was dating Kim Kardashian for a while, correct?
Yeah, like every girl.
Well, I think he was the first. I think she was the first really beautiful woman that led off this chain of events. Is that true?
No.
It wasn't?
Way before that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, the thing about Kim, that story that I think is interesting, is they got together because she hosted SNL. And he was a cast member at the time. And after they wrapped that night, Kim hosted a party for the cast and the crew. And everyone showed up except Pete Davidson. He was the only cast member who didn't come to her party. And suddenly, who the fuck is this Pete Davidson guy? Like, why didn't he come? Did he have something better to do? Is there and like, I'm sure against her own will or better judgment, Kim started to wonder about this guy who stood out by being the only one who wasn't coming to her party and saying, what a great job you did. Oh, you're beautiful. You look great tonight. You were so funny. You know, it's like he stood out, and he was only able to stand out in that way because 99% of the other people were probably bountiful with their compliments and their praise and their attraction and their effusion. And that created a contrast. It created some mystery. It created some uncertainty. Like, I'm Kim. I can get any man I want. Like, who is this guy? And I think on some level, Kim might have seen that as a challenge. Like, I have to be able to get this guy now. And apparently she did. Now, once a guy gets a beautiful woman, it's so much easier to get other beautiful women because women want what other women want. Why? Well, it's very hard to actually accurately evaluate a man. You can't even know generally what their net worth is, which is one of the easiest things to calculate just by looking at a guy, right? For better or for worse, the criteria that men use on women is more immediately recognizable.
Yeah.
Right?
The prerequisite is looks.
A big part of it is looks. And, you know, women fudge that all the time in ways that they can with makeup and bras and things like that, but they can't avoid it altogether. The things that women tend to sort for aren't immediately apparent, right? It takes time to figure that out. And women don't have a lot of time. They certainly don't have as much time as men do. So it takes time to run the test. So most women don't. As I talk about in the book, when passengers are going around trying to figure out what ship they want to get on, one of the things that they use to make their decision is the size of the crowd that's already standing in front of that ship. That's a proxy. That woman can reasonably assume that all those in that group of people, at least some of them must have done their due diligence and said, this is the best ship at the dock. So I don't need to spend the time and energy and the cost to make the essay. I can just assume that, look, all these other women want to be on this ship. So that must be a good ship. And because it takes so long to evaluate a man, and because we understand that a beautiful woman can pretty much get any man that she wants, one of the best signs of a man's status or character is the fact that he is dating and has access to a beautiful woman. We're going to assume that that woman could have one of thousands or millions of men, and she chose that man. Wow, I didn't really think much of Pete before, but man, now I'm giving him a second look. It's like there must be something there. Man, he's really funny. Maybe he's got a third leg. I don't know, but it's there's got to be something that's there, right?
It's like I guess it's like in principle the winner's effect, right? Like the more you win, the easier it becomes to continue winning.
Sure.
Right. And I think a lot of people are social proof is huge.
Also, if a man like Pete develops a reputation for only dating beautiful women, then obviously any woman that he dates will be seen as beautiful.
Right.
And that's the Playboy bunny effect, is that as soon as you become a bunny, you can be assured that there's going to be men who are going to think you're more attractive than you otherwise would be without that designation.
It's very interesting. Someone asked, what are your predictions 10 plus years out when the millions of women who grew up receiving attention on social media age out? How insane will they go?
I wonder. I mean, it's an honest question. Like receiving attention, especially receiving attention precociously, can really mess women up. We don't talk about this because it makes some people uncomfortable, but women know what I'm talking about. They'll hit 13, 14, they go through puberty, and suddenly the men around them start to treat them differently. The boys in the class, the teachers in the class, their friends' fathers, it's just like the vibe changes. They sense something different. And, a teenage girl is not prepared to understand her own power over men, which has been invested in her, not by anything that she is or has done, but because of those men's own lust or attraction for her. It's a very difficult position for a young woman to be in. And if she receives too much attention too precociously, she may not invest in other parts of her personality or her lifestyle, right? And this was true even before social media. Now, a woman could be 18, 19 years old and have 2 million followers on Instagram. Every day she's receiving 100 legitimate marriage proposals. It's like, that's going to be extremely difficult to watch ebb. But I will say it probably won't ebb entirely. Like there's some maybe bitter men who are just like waiting for these women's comeuppance in the sense of Schadenfreude. But most likely, even if she goes from 2 million to 200,000 followers, there's going to be men in there who are interested in giving her attention and relationships and provision. So that's an enormous hedge. Another thing I talk about is we can see a woman like that potentially as a kind of female captain. A female captain is somebody who, remember we talked about the airlines? Captains want to cram as many people into their plane as possible and get as much as they can from them, okay? And females want to exchange their sexual opportunity for resources. So a female captain is going to use her sexual opportunity to get as much money as she can from the biggest horde of men possible. And using social media or OnlyFans platforms, she can leverage that. She can use her one body, her one sexual opportunity, and mechanically reproduce that at scale. It's amazing. So now, potentially for the first time in human history, it's easier for an average woman to get $1 from 1 million men than $1 million from one man. Women still would like to have $1 million, but how they go about getting it is changing because of the incentives and opportunities involved, okay? So And so one of the strategies for a female captain like this is to get as much money as you can, as fast as you can, for as long as you can. And let me tell you, if you age out at 35, but you have $10 million and still a very loyal cohort of men who are interested and attracted to you, you're going to be just fine. Like, and there's a lot of guys who don't want to hear that, but like, she's going to be okay. Even if she wants to have kids, there's going to be somebody who's going to be willing to wife her up at 35. There's going to be someone willing to pay her for IVF at 45 if she wants. Don't worry about it. Worry about yourself, dude.
I've been keeping an eye on chat, and a lot of people have been very impressed of how you've been able to also type points from 2 hours ago, right? Like you talked about the captain and the ship. And then also Lucas said, how do you identify and express insights so logically? You speak with firm confidence, and it's all neatly compartmentalized and fit like a puzzle. I think this is something I'm also interested in as well, right? And I think this is something that both men and women can employ in whatever situation, because communication is so important. What would you advise for both men and women to improve that?
Oh, well, I'll speak personally first to answer that question. I think the reason why I can do this is because these aren't just like casual opinions that I have. These are ideas that have come from over a decade of very deep introspection that are bolstered by research and evidence and have met with success in my own life and the lives of thousands of other people. Like it's very difficult to not have confidence once you reach that point. This isn't just something that I want to think is true,
or that I just had
a thought at a random bar last night over a drink. It's like these are very deeply thought out, extrapolated models of reality. And I try as best as possible to follow a line of thought all the way to its logical conclusion. So that's why I can, I think, speak with some measure of confidence. So the question is, how can like men and women
improve their confidence, improve how they speak? Because I think that's the best projection of your confidence.
Well, I mean, they can do a lot to do that. One way to do that is, first of all, to listen to a lot of different people. Like one of the biggest privileges I have as a therapist is I've sat in the inner confidence with thousands of different people from all kinds of walks of life without judgment to try to understand their perspective and their experience. And that gives me a more unbiased access to data than somebody who's just interested in talking and not listening. Like you have to listen before you talk. And listening could be engaging with other people. It could also be reading and watching content, especially of those that you might not agree with on the surface. A lot of people don't have access to good data because they have contempt prior to investigation. And they assume there's nothing in that for me, or I already know what this person is going to say. And that really limits their ability to grow and introspect. And then, if you can, start to talk to people not only that seemingly agree with you, but that don't agree with you. One of the best ways to learn is to teach. So before I was, I've worked in education for over 2 decades. I was a private tutor. I was a university professor at a couple different colleges. I taught thousands of people in classes and individually. And one of the things that I've learned is that I have to be able to take this potentially complex idea and package it in a way that this person who might have a much lower understanding, maybe even a much lower intelligence than me, can understand without making them feel dumb or lost, which is tough. Because if you talk too high, you make them feel dumb. And if you talk too low, it's like they feel bored.
Yeah.
You have to find this middle ground.
It's the same thing with content.
It's true. So one of the best ways to clarify what you truly think and believe is to try to teach it to another person, because you'll realize very quickly that how it makes sense to you doesn't necessarily make sense to another person. And so you get better, almost like a A/B split test, on trying to figure out what words in what formats are better at communicating an idea effectively. And you can always be iterating and optimizing in that respect.
So I wanted to kind of save this until the end because I really wanted to hear from you. But one thing that I don't know how deeply you looked into my channel, but I've actually had a false accusation launched to me in college. So I'm sure as your experience as a therapist and in psychology, that's probably like the worst fear of many, many women. And I think that's probably what prevents a lot of men from even approaching women in the first place. How often do you hear about the fear of false accusation among your male clients or even women? And do you think it's sometimes used as a cope to avoid the pains and horrors of dating?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm sorry to hear that, man. I'm sure that
best thing that's ever happened to me.
Really?
Because that's how I view it. Because it taught me how to handle pressure. It taught me how to look at both sides. It also taught me how to handle myself during very emotionally tough times. If I didn't go through that experience, I probably wouldn't have been able to build the channel that I have today.
What a great attitude, man.
Thank you. And I'm not just saying that in like a cringe hopecore way. Like I genuinely believe that.
I don't get that sense.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that's not how you felt the week after you were arrested or you were
kicked out of college.
Kicked out of college.
Had to hire lawyers.
Yeah, I'm sure at that time you weren't like, thank God for this experience.
Oh, no, hell no.
It's really going to help me launch a YouTube channel. So that's something that is probably the most resilient reframe of a difficult or traumatic experience that you can hope for as a therapist. And it's something that doesn't happen overnight. I'm sure you had to struggle with all kinds of feelings and deal with the fallout to your education, your relationships, your career,
reputation.
I've had false rumors circulated about me in communities that I value, and it's extremely damaging and hurtful. And it did teach me a lot from that experience. But you have to kind of go through the ringer and let some things go and learn some unpleasant truths about reality, and it can make you a much stronger, wiser, kinder person. So, good on you for that.
Thank you.
I will say that I don't hear of many people who actually have had false accusations leveled against them, at least to that extent. If you were kicked out of college, it must mean that somebody made a complaint to the administration. So there's a term that some people might want to know. You probably already know. It's called administrative violence or administrative aggression. It's like using proxies to harm another person. This could mean making false reports to university administrators or to the police, or just spreading malicious gossip in important communities, right? So this is one way in which it's typically women who do these things, show that they're just as aggressive as men can be. There's a lot of bias with respect to aggression in the genders, and we tend to think that men are more aggressive than women just because we tend to stereotypically believe that aggression has to do with physical violence. And obviously that's an issue, but that's certainly not the only way that you can hurt another person, right? I'd say that the number of men that I've consulted with who are afraid of false accusations outnumber the men who have received false accusations by at least 100 to 1, at least. That said, could that one instance be, or possibility be so aversive that it's going to make 100 men think twice? Could. But this is what I would say with respect to this, because this often comes up in the context of like pickup. A lot of guys are afraid that they're going to be recorded, that they're going to be Me Too'd, they're going to be shamed publicly. And that certainly hasn't been my experience. I have approached over 1,000 women in the belly of the beast in woke progressive San Francisco. And I've never been slapped. I've never had a drink thrown in my face. I've never been called a name. There's never been, like, the worst a woman has ever done is I've gone up to her and say, "Hey, I'm Orion. What's your name?" And she just kind of went. She gave me this quick up and down, and she just turned away without a word. And I was like, "Oh, ouch. But, in 2 minutes, I was talking to somebody else and it was over.
Yeah.
That was the worst. And I think part of the reason why is it has to do with the vibe in which I tend to approach women. Obviously, how you are received is ultimately out of your control, but you can do a lot to influence that. And I approach a woman generally with a smile on my face and with warmth. And my intention is like, no matter how this goes, whether she's interested or not, has a boyfriend or not, who cares? I can exchange. I can have a moment of pleasant connection with another human being for a few minutes, regardless of whether I get what I want. And if we can't do business, that's okay. We might be able to do business some other time. I don't know, but like, that's fine. Don't worry about it. It was nice to meet you. I had to come over and say something. You looked great tonight, and enjoy the rest of your night. And then you just go on your way. So I imagine that your false accusation didn't come from picking girls up at a bar, though.
It was with a girl that I was already been talking with and hooked up before. So I guess the short synopsis is she accused me that I put her down, forcefully put my fingers inside of her, like a fraternity event that we went to. And yeah, it led to her going to Title IX, going to my frat. I was kicked out. Title IX found me not guilty, but then it still went to the school board. The school board then found me guilty. And then I had to hire lawyers, take lie detector test. And at the end, they admitted that they made a procedural error and that they should have just dropped the case after Title IX found me not guilty. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's a very, God, that's got to be a really tricky thing, because as soon as you level that claim, you're already guilty. Mm-hmm. There are certain accusations that in our culture you're just guilty until you're proven innocent, and often you don't even get the chance to prove your innocence. In this case, you didn't. They just decided to drop the case, and you might not ever really have gotten to tell your story on the record, which is unfortunately an experience of many men who get caught up in these sorts of ordeals. So other defenses against this, one of my mentors suggested that, he told me he does this himself, that he always asks for nudes in particular from a woman prior to a date. Not just pics, but nudes.
Before a first date?
Yeah.
Are you serious?
That's what he told me.
Okay.
I mean, it's probably not the first thing. Hey, I'm Orion. Can I get some nudes? It's probably not the first thing that you ask for. But, even if you meet on an app, there's some texting back and forth. Maybe there's some phone calls. There's some pre-courtship to the actual first date. And his explanation was, yeah, it's like, this is it's not watertight, but it's like, it's pretty hard evidence that this woman is entering into this interaction consensually and understanding that it's likely going to be a sexual encounter. Now, obviously, women can and should be able to change their minds whenever they want, but like, that makes sure that everyone's kind of more or less on the same page, that sex is at least a strong possibility for this interaction.
Interesting. And it works?
I don't know if it works. He says that he does it. And I think that it can also help to reveal a woman's level of attraction for you. Because if a woman's less attracted to you or just wants to get certain things from you, she's going to balk at that. And then you're like, okay, well, I don't have to invest my time and energy here.
Yeah, I guess it's like a filter, right?
Can be.
Last question. I'm curious if you could give me advice on my own relationship. So I think I told you off stream, my girlfriend is actually in Brazil, like lives in Brazil.
Oh, which part of Brazil?
Sao Paulo. So we met because she saw actually one of my videos.
Look at you. I'm telling you, it's the fame. Did she DM you?
It was, so I was only at like 14K subs or something like that. Wow. Okay. And she followed me on Instagram, followed her back because I was like, oh, she's cute. We started texting, we talked for 2 months, and then I made the trip to Brazil 2 years ago. Since then, we've been dating. It's been over 2 years. And yeah, it's going great, right? Obviously, we only get to see each other every 2-3 months. We're busy and that makes it hard. There's obviously distance. But from what I see right now, I would love to take the next step. But I'm curious, based on all your experience that you've had, what are some things that I should be careful about? What are some things that from the limited time that you got to know me, what are some things that I should be careful about as I progress in this relationship?
Well, I've been in that situation. I actually dated a Brazilian woman, long distance.
Really?
Yeah, back in the day. And so I know a little bit about this intercontinental romance.
Sure.
And I can tell you that Uncle Sam hates international romance.
Yeah.
So that was one of the things that we were coming up against, is that you might want to take it to the next step, but it's very hard to create a circumstance or a context in which the two of you could date like normal people without getting married.
Yeah.
Like she can come on a 6-month tourist visa, but she's going to act like a visitor while she's here, which is kind of what happened with me. She's not allowed to work legally. She might not have any friends. She might not have anything else to do. And you're probably going to be covering all the costs. And so you might have a life with your work and your friends and various aspects of your life. And she just came for you. That's a dangerous imbalance, because what I found is when that occurred, she was looking for me to be her family, which she left behind, to provide her with the fulfillment with the job that she quit, to pay for everything, which was a huge tax on me at the time because I was still a grad student, to be her friend network and always available to like talk to her and I was working 14, 15 hours a day at that time. And I didn't have a lot of discretionary income, and I was stressed out myself. And so she was often just sitting at home waiting for me to come home. And that was not a good situation to be in. But the alternative, the only way to kind of get her to build her life in a sustainable way, seemed to be to get married, which I wasn't willing to do in the absence of like any sign that we could actually integrate our lives together in a meaningful way. As I told her, I don't believe in the magic ring. I don't think when you give a woman a ring, it magically makes the relationship better. It's like the ring at best should be a recognition of a relationship that's already working. And so you'll get the ring when the relationship is working. Well, she's like, well, the relationship can't work unless I get the ring. And that became a Mexican standoff on some level. And ultimately, I decided that it would be best if we went our separate ways, and she went back to Brazil. So that's something to be aware of. I will also say that long distance relationships are particularly prone to that disillusionment that I was talking about, because the phone is a very curated peephole. She's going to show you the pics from the right angle that she wants you to see. She can think about and edit her responses. It's not the same thing as being in real time with somebody, and certainly not the same thing as like living together or dating like normal people. Right. So one of the things that I would recommend for long distance is to not, it's going to be hard because you're like, well, that doesn't work if I don't do this, but to not do things for the person that you wouldn't do for somebody that you're living in the same town with. Because that's already creating like these unrealistic expectations. This relationship is going to be even more than what I would offer somebody who's actually giving me more because I'm living in the same place at the same time with them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So I'd often go down there, or she'd come up here, but even then it was like we were on vacation, and there was a lot of great times and a lot of good sex, and it was fun, but that also wasn't really real life. And you can present a version of yourself through the phone, and you can keep it together for, I mean, everyone can be the best version of themselves for a week on vacation. Right. You know what I'm saying? But that doesn't necessarily mean that's who you would get if you sign up for a long-term partnership. So what I would recommend, if possible, which is what I was trying to get with this girl back in the day, is if you want to bring her up here, she has to have another reason to come besides you. It might be a convenient pretext, but like make sure that she can have a job. Make sure that she has some sort of community. She has to come with a purpose besides just making it work with you. Otherwise, the pressure and expectation that she's going to put on this relationship to be everything for her, because Brazilians, I don't know about this girlfriend, but they talk a lot. They have a lot of friends. They often live with their parents until they get married. It's like they like a lot of people. They like to be really close all the time. I'm not like that. So there's also cultural differences that need to be navigated. And if she's leaving behind her friends and her colleagues and her family for you, it's going to be very hard for you, regardless of your preference is to be 100 people for her. So you need to get 99 other people into her life as quickly as possible. And then to date for a while as if you lived in the same town and she was just like any other woman.
That's really good advice.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Learned it the hard way.
Yeah. Wow. That's kind of crazy how you've literally, I wasn't expecting you to have a very, very similar experience.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
I never thought I'd get involved in a long distance relationship.
Neither did I.
Yeah,
Neither did I.
I think everyone can make that mistake once.
Yeah. Okay.
Hopefully it works out.
Huh. Okay.
I'm rooting for you.
Thank you. Well, guys, any last questions for Orion? This was absolutely fascinating. We'll take one more question. Let's see. Okay, last question by Matt. Is it possible to build sexual confidence without sleeping around? I'm picky with the women I sleep with and want to attract the top quality.
No. I mean, just, is it possible to get confidence in anything without doing it? Like, I don't think that that's reasonable. So whether we like it or not, to get confident and competent in anything, we need practice. And the same is true if you're giving a PowerPoint presentation, or you're a baseball player at an at-bat, or if you're in the bedroom, like you need reps. And this is especially important for men because, okay, this guy talked about how he's really picky and he wants only to go for the most attractive women. It's like, that's like being a baseball player and saying, I only want to go to bat when the bases are loaded, it's the bottom of the ninth. It's like, if you haven't gone at bats under other circumstances, how are you actually going to take good advantage of your pitch when you really need and want to? It's like waiting for a really attractive woman, or the one. Let's say she does actually show up. Let's say that she sits down right next to you on the bar stool, and she's alone. She's dressed to the nines. She just turns to you and she gives you these, like, how are you going to feel confident that you can pick that woman up if you've never picked a woman up before? And having picked her up, that you can seduce her, and having seduced her, that you could keep her, because beautiful women are harder to keep than they are to seduce. I'll tell you that. So unfortunately, I don't think it's possible. There are trade-offs, but if you want real confidence in anything, I think you have to put in enough reps that you can trust that, all things being equal, you can do it well. Yeah, because confidence and competency comes from eating shit. Like you even said yourself, you made 97 videos before you had one viral video, right? Yeah. And now you're at 700,000 subscribers. Yeah, I just hit it yesterday. Congratulations, by the way. Big deal. There's no way he would have been able to reach that. There's no way I've been able to reach 500,000 subscribers if you don't go through the initial stages of like getting fucking 10 views on each video. It's impossible. And it hurts. The first time hurts the most. The second time hurts the second most. The third time hurts the third most. And then after about, I don't know, 20 to 40 rejections or failures, you kind of understand that, oh, this doesn't have to be heartbreaking. It doesn't have to be ego shattering. Maybe it's just information. It's feedback from the universe that I haven't hit upon the right recipe, the right combination of behaviors to unlock the success that I want, and to keep chasing that by listening to the feedback that you're getting from either women or business partners or the universe. It's like learn to listen better. I think that's a really good message to end it in. Orion, if you want to do kind of like a final plug for the couple of viewers that we have in here. Oh, sure. So I'm Orion Taraban. My YouTube channel is PsychHacks. So go ahead and check that out. I post long form content a couple times a week. My book is right here. It's called The Value of Others. I'm really proud of it, and I think it actually turned out to be pretty good. It's a little bit more advanced than the content on YouTube. That's by design, because what's good for YouTube isn't good for a book, and vice versa. And my hope is that the content of this book will still be relevant 100 years from now. So I wanted to really like put out a definitive vision of relationships that might stand the test of time. I think that's probably good. Yeah, that was a nice little smooth integration. I loved it. I loved it. Thank you so much for having me on. No, thank you so much. That was great. This is like the first time I'm doing these sorts of in-person kind of interviews, but I like it. It's so dynamic than like just like a kind of set, like a podcast. I don't know. You've done a lot of podcasts, so I'm curious on like any feedback you have. We're always trying to improve here. Sure. I think this was a lot of fun. I think it was a great conversation that we had. One piece of feedback that I might give you in the future is maybe have 2 cameras set up. Because there's just the one.
Yeah.
I want to talk to you, but that means that I'm in profile. I'm not really engaging with your audience. And if I answer your question looking out like this, I look like a maniac, right? So
right.
having 2 different cameras focused on the 2 different people that obviously need to be edited afterwards, but like that could be more dynamic and interesting to your audience.
I love it. I love it. Guys, we're always trying to improve here. So thank you guys for joining in. We'll definitely be doing a lot more of this. This was a lot of fun. Great feedback. Enjoy my stay. Yeah, I mean, it's been an early day, so it's not like crazy numbers. But one thing that's been great is a consistent 100 or 80 or so of people stayed throughout the whole, 3 hours?
Wow,
yeah, 3 hours. That was 3 hours.
Great. Amazing. Good talk.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
See everyone. Good seeing y'all.